Today's chat is brought to you by, well, all of your support. Through the patronage you provide the Focus Fire chat team through Podbean's crowdfunding, we are able to provide you with the weekly podcast as well as the website and other aspects of Focus Fire chat. If you have any interest in becoming a patron of the FFC, please be sure to visit our website and click on the support link. Even a single dollar helps, and for those of you who are already patrons, thank you again for your generosity. You may have heard the whispers of guardians gathering in the shadows, exploring the mysteries of this world and the worlds which surround us. We are all in search of truth. Sometimes we need to focus that search, focus that fire. And so we come together. Join us. Join the discussion. Welcome to Focused Fire Chat. Welcome back for episode 164 of Focus Fire Chat, recorded live on April 12th, 2019 over on twitch.tv/FocusFireChat. As always, I want to give a big shout out to our live chat here with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us once again. Our topic for tonight's episode is going to be a look at A Man with No Name. I keep getting that, keep tripping me up because it used to be The Man with No Name. It got updated to A Man with No Name. But first, let's run through a quick introduction of those on the show for tonight. As always, this is your host, Blue Crew 86. Next up, we have our own master of social media, the one and only Green-Eyed Music Lover. Green, hope you're doing well. How's the week treated you so far?
It has been an interesting one. We got more of the house done. My office is almost absolutely completed. I have new soundboards that we made up, and things are looking pretty good here. Snow is pretty much done for the time being. So yeah, it's not been too bad.
That's good.
How about everybody else? Because I never know how to segue out of this, because it's just like, yeah, things were great. And this is awkward.
All right, Han Solo, calm down there. I'll just ask you how you're doing from the detention center.
Oh man, we're doing fine. We're doing fine. Everything's fine.
We're good. We're good. We're fine.
Just a malfunction with the lasers there. We're fine though. Don't worry about sending anybody. How are you?
The fire wasn't that bad, I promise.
Next up, we have our good buddy, the lore content cop himself, Beard Grizzly. Beard, how are you doing?
Oh goodness!
That's my comment.
Yes. That's all it is.
That's all. I mean, we don't need anything else, right? Like,
Chewy.
Just the Wookiee.
Just more Chewy.
Wookiee bear at this point. You know,
Wookiee bear.
I don't know. Anyway, I'm good.
You could be an Ewok.
Yeah. No. What's an Ewok? Why are we bringing up Ewoks?
They're adorable.
They might be adorable, but they have no place in the Star Wars universe. You stop
that.
Jump. I refuse to think that the Empire was taken down by sticks and stones.
Jump.
I refuse to think this way.
I love that Green has literally just resorted to jump. Jump. Oh my god. So to get us out of this
yes,
mess.
Please, because apparently this is like the Star Wars celebration that won't end. It's sort of like the song that won't end anymore.
Yeah, it's like, man, did you get to go back in time when they announced the single player game with no microtransactions?
Oh my god.
Yeah, I know. Like, oh my god, that sounds like it's something totally from 2009. Like, I can't even believe that we're 10 years later and this game is still playing the way that it is. It's like Respawn Entertainment has their host company buy a certain part of anatomy, in which case they are basically telling them, we're going to show you how games are actually made because you keep screwing it up.
Wow.
So Green, I know you had a question for the community.
Yeah. Let me settle that. Gosh dang, how do you follow a Star Wars thing? Like, I mean, good lord. This is quite the day. Okay, so this week's question was it's more of like an RP question. I asked the community, you just got resurrected as a guardian, and your ghost asks you, what name do you choose for yourself? What do you do? And we had a few different people. It was kind of a lower answered one. I figured it would be just because it's a little bit more engaging because not everybody interacts with their character in the same way.
Sure.
But a few people were very amusing. I'm trying to think of his name. Worthy D was like Tim.
Some people,
Tim.
they call me
Tim. And there was like Bob and a bunch of other ones. There we go.
Tim the Toolman Taylor?
No,
Yes,
Tim the Wizard.
Tim the Wizard.
Tim the Wizard?
Yeah, Blue responded with, I think it was the gift
Tim.
that was.
Yeah, it's Tim the Wizard from Monty Python. He's got a freaking rocket launcher staff.
Yeah, it's flame-throwing, rocket-launching staff. It's just ridiculous. Chatting Myth, which is our friend Demi, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He put, knowing me, I probably would resurrect with a book and or journal on my person. With that said, today my name would be Anakin or Sir Duncan the Tall. Uni was like, if I was awakened with a similar situation in D1, it would be something like, well, shite, or what the hell. And then his wife popped in and said, shut the front door. Shut the front door. Which I guess I want to ask you two. Like, if you woke up, would you respond to your ghost? Like, what would you tell your ghost your name is? Because technically you don't remember your name. At least most people don't unless they have something on their person like that, like Anna Bray or like what Demi was mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's
what would
actually,
you have?
That's
what would
actually
you
like something that I've actually bounced around in my head too, is like, I guess my confusion on that front is ultimately the separation between memories. Like my understanding of how memories work, it's not something that's cut nicely and cleanly. Like, you can't remember your past life, but you conveniently can remember all the syntax and conversational norms of humanity to the degree that you can name yourself within 30 seconds of being, for all intents and purposes, reborn. Like,
right, and we're going to get into some of that aspect too.
Right, and like the segregate, but I mean, like, so that's where, like, for me personally, it's always been kind of like a head scratcher, because it's like, what is there that allows you to identify yourself or another as a specific individual? Because with the progression of psychology and progression of psychological identity, that is not something that is like compartmentalized so cleanly.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right.
I mean, it's just, I mean, and to be fair, there's a lot of indications too that sometimes it's not the guardian that names it, it's the ghost, and other times, there are times where, but I mean, it's like the few instances that we do see with not with the exception of those who have like names that are based on things around them. It seems like they identify with the world that they're in, but they don't have any memory of it, which to me is a very weird, nuanced way of explaining memory. And given that that's a very big component of a guardian, like, to me, that's just a really intriguing thought puzzle, is like, how do you remember all the nuances of language and the ability to identify individual unique structures within the world around you, but that you have no memory of anything? Like, it's kind of that nature versus nurture thing. It's
right.
Language in and of itself is not a it's not a natural thing. The concept of language, like communication, is a natural thing, but language as we know it is not a natural thing. You have to be taught language. You have to be taught how to say certain things. If you don't believe me, go hang out with a group of 5-year-olds and listen to them trying to pluralize things that don't need to be plural. I mean, like, it's very, it's innocent, and but it's also indicative of the fact that language as a abstract construct is not a a natural occurring like a natural occurring event. You have to be instructed, and that's why, you know, when kids are little, that's why it's so easy to teach them additional languages, because their brains are still malleable in that regard, that they are able to pick up very quickly the different, you know, denotations of certain events. Whereas as you go down the road in years of life, that particular creation of synapses don't really respond as quickly to that front, which is why a lot of times it's more difficult to learn languages. So it's, and like, you know, and I see chats mentioning the exos, like that's kind of where the exos, I do see an exo character as being able to identify their ID, for lack of a better word, their unit identification. It seems like they are able to do that a little bit better, at least. But yeah, I mean,
I'm gonna say, like, Guardians as a whole seem like they're in a lot of ways like a basic computer program that require a bit of input that then builds off of that input.
Right.
That's where, at least in my mind, from the stuff that we especially know from Ecdysis and Dust and whatnot, both of those actually seem to point towards further ideas of that, I think. But to answer Green's question, I think I would just be named Marvin.
Marvin? Like the Martian?
Yeah, I was thinking that, or like, you know, Marvin, you know, Chuck Berry's cousin. Anyway.
I am flabbergasted.
I don't. Not quite a Disney reference, but
no.
You know.
But I don't know how to recover after that, so...
I mean, we could just ramp this thing up to 88 miles an hour and keep moving on.
Yeah, let's do that. So, yeah, my own Guardian, I have gone through, and it's nothing nearly as, I would say, thoughtful as Beard or Blues. My character on almost all of Skyrim and everything else is either named Fedra or Kree. And so this character I'm on right now is Fedra. My hunter is Fedra. My Titan is Kree.
But where's Jocelyn?
I think it's funny. Shh. Shh. I forgot you've read those. I forgot you read those.
Let's be honest here. The only one that gave a really thoughtful answer was Blue.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean,
effectively,
Beard did give a thoughtful answer. His was just a really quick thought. Like,
yeah. I mean, you know, Screwball, Marvin Berry. It's a Back to the Future joke.
It's like, a terrible commentary, though.
It's a terrible Back to the Future joke, but it's also hysterical.
It is pretty funny.
Because it's effectively where Chuck Berry gets the idea for Johnny Be Good is because Marty is playing the song at a high school dance. That's the idea behind it, which...
Paradox.
Yep, I'm going to say good old-fashioned paradox. Marty is his own grandfather complex. However, it's in music, not in being. Anyway,
the actual physical father. Yeah.
Right. You get it. Yes.
Yeah, I'm really good about just explaining the things that are really not needing to be explained. So let's move on.
Right.
So we're off to a great start. So let's run through the standard intro notes, and then we'll get right into it. In our last episode of Focus Fire Chat, we discussed Ghost and their Guardians. If you enjoy the show, please be sure to rate and, if you can, leave us a written review on either iTunes or comment on the episodes on Podbean or whichever podcasting app you use to enjoy podcasts. Reviews are extremely helpful as they not only let us know what we can do better, but help continue to expand the FFC family, which allows more and more perspectives to be heard. To those of you who have already taken the time to leave us a review, thank you. As many of you already know, Focus Fire Chat is a gathering place where the intent is to offer a week-long, in-depth view of a particular subject from within game lore, with a special focus on the Destiny universe. This chat begins every Tuesday morning and runs until the following Tuesday, with topics decided by the group via a poll that begins every Friday and ends on the Tuesday morning of the new chat. Every Friday at around 10 p.m. Central, we get together to stream a high-level summary of the previous week's chat for those who are unable to participate. If you're a fan of lore in all its various forms, be sure to also check out thelorenetwork.com, where you can find a wide variety of some amazing content that covers a number of different titles and mediums. This will also be the new home for the Focus Fire Chat episode note archives and articles going forward. Our next chat is going to be a discussion on the lore book For Every Rose a Thorn. However, as always, please be sure to weigh in on the poll this weekend to let us know which topic you want to discuss after that. Links to that poll can be found on either Twitter at FocusFireChat or within our Discord server. Before we jump into the information and thoughts that the community had about A Man with No Name, however, let's have a quick chat about this week's Lost Lore. For Lost Lord this week, what I was thinking about talking about was something that Green and I had kind of mentioned back and forth in our chats, but something that's kind of the best way to explain it is it's a phenomenon basically that's like the mask you wear, and this is something that we see a lot with the Drifter in particular. Insofar as if you wear a mask for long enough, that mask will become a part of you. It's the age-old, thought of, fake it until you make it kind of concept is after a while, what you pretend will actually, in a way, become real to you at least. And so what we see as we go through, especially this particular lore book, is the Drifter He is a man with no name. We never get to hear what he calls himself. I guess
we hear what other people call him.
Right. He gives names freely. He changes masks very frequently. But the thing to also keep in mind is, again, every mask is indicative of the person wearing it. There is a glimmer of something true behind those things, because otherwise they wouldn't be as adhered to these characters as we see them being, especially with especially the Germain figure that Drifter crafts here in this book is something that does actually impact him, because he mentions events from the Germain story arc that we're going to discuss in current day Destiny, which is significantly a long time after what happened here in this book. Right. The story arc for this book takes place really predominantly in the Dark Age, early Dark Age to the late Dark Age. We're not really sure that there is a transition of time. It's not very clear how long of a time this is covered, because again, with the Drifter being risen, time is not really a construct that most of these Guardians pay attention to really. And so, but it is something that is taking place during the war between the Iron Lords and the Warlords. We don't really know, and I really appreciate the fact that there is a large confusion on what side's the best side. You see that even in the Wu Ming arc, as I've come to call it. And Drifter, from the very get-go, we'll see is already kind of introduced into a world that is unfair towards anybody who doesn't have this power. And he doesn't like that, actually. And that's an interesting caveat of his character, is he actually does seem to care for those who are underfoot for this whole massive between this Titan Maki that is going on between these demigods. Basically, Drifter is the one that's in the mud with the humans. He's the one that's in the mud with the mortal creatures of this world, and he's even to the point he's pretending to be one of them. He doesn't want to be arisen, it seems like. And you'll see that, again, especially when we get into that Germain story arc, you see how deeply he has integrated himself into a human colony, to the point that the way it's written, it's almost hard to tell which one of the characters that's being talked about is actually the Drifter up until the very end. And it's just, to me, it just is very, very telling that this is part of the catalyst that causes the Drifter to leave, to search for that weapon to end the war between those who bear the light, which is what leads him to the whole monolith situation, and eventually will even to a degree lead him into what we're learning about with the Invitations of the Nine, which was, I believe that was last weekend, the tidbit
the coins.
about the coins, and then the comment about he hates violence, but he will kill anybody who tries to force him into it. Like it's one of those like catch-22s. Drifter is a character who abhors violence, but doesn't really seem to balk from dishing it out to those who are threatening, fill in the blank of who he has decided needs to be. Protected is a bit of a strong word, because I don't really see him as a protector, but he's almost like this really weird justice warrior, if that makes sense. Which I think will be more clear as we get in, especially into the Wu Ming arc. It becomes a little bit clearer. Mm-hmm. But that was kind of just that was a conversation again that Green and I were having, especially about like the mask that Drifter wears, and like how he almost seems to effortlessly be a chameleon as far as the personality goes. But if you look at each of these figures, especially the three that we'll talk about here, which is pretty much there's the Nameless arc, what I kind of call it, the Germain arc, and then the Wu Ming arc. And if you look at the underlying theme of what the character is trying to do in these arcs, there is a common thread between them all, and that common thread is really kind of, he is in a way kind of a pacifist. He's not a pacifist, but he is searching for.
He's an opportunist.
He is an opportunist, and he is not by any stretch of the imagination a necessarily honorable or good person. But I would also encourage you to really, if you read these books, read very carefully the difference with how he treats Risen and how he treats mortals, because there is a vast difference there. And I think for me, especially when I was reading it, that stood out really very clearly. And I think that also ties into the comments that he makes within the Thorn Quest about the Praxic Order, because he assumes that Honor, when she was attacking the Shadows, had done collateral damage against humans, and that really kind of seemed to anger him. Mm-hmm. And it was again, both sides in that situation. I know Beard and I have gone back and forth about this, but both sides of that situation had information being presented to them that wasn't entirely accurate. And so it was more interesting to me to see how each side reacted to the clarifications as it got, kind of clarified through the quest. You see Honor and the Praxics backing off because they recognize that the Drifter is not this evil monster that they initially thought. They're not necessarily happy with him, which, that's understandable. And then you also kind of see Drifter also, I wouldn't say Drifter kind of really changes much, but he lessens his venom, I guess you would say, towards them as well. And I think that's, again, just kind of indicative of both sides, of them learning more about what the situation is actually happening. But yeah, I think that to me is again, that was where I was kind of thinking we could go with the Lost Lore. It's also kind of a good semi-introduction to this particular book. And I know Green is trying to set us up to read the first book, which is
entry. Yes.
Which is Heaven or Hell. But Beard, did you have anything you wanted to throw in there?
Yeah, before we jump too far, Shaggy Games is asking, so are we saying the Drifter is some sort of anti-hero? No. I wouldn't go that far whatsoever. I wouldn't say that he's an anti-hero. I wouldn't say he's a hero. I would say that he walks the thin line, and we're starting to, again, with this entire, I think, annual pass season that's been presented to us as a whole, we're starting to see more bits and pieces of this thin line that were only showcasing themselves like over time. Drifter is the epitome of that thin line. He's what we get in the game that pretty well showcases that as like a general whole. But there are many other characters that otherwise really skirt like what side is dark and light and so on. And it isn't just about like utilizing the dark's power or utilizing the light's power or walking in the middle. The Bungie writers in general have been playing this game of perspective for so long that it really does come down to your perspective of events that ends up changing how you can interpret something very quickly. And I know I'm kind of tangenting here a little bit, but overall the major point to kind of showcase, I mean, nothing new with me in tangents, what am I talking about? The major point, though, to kind of think about is the ideas of perspective and like how Drifter sees something, how Honor sees something, how Ikora sees something that the two of them did or either one of them did. These are the kinds of things that you have to kind of consider is the person's perspective and how that would weigh towards decisions over time. We also see that, though, with other characters that kind of line in with it that I know we're going to talk about here, I think, this week and already kind of have with, like, Shin Malphur and so on. These are just other characters that have walked that thin line. And that's kind of where we're at this point, is seeing what that thin line realistically is. It's why I think they had Uldren do the line that he did in the Forsaken campaign. The line between light and dark is so very thin. Which side are you on? It doesn't matter that we wield the light. The proof is in the pudding in our actions, not in what we have.
I agree. I like how, and we saw this with the last lore update, or like the time before lore update, with Shin understands Drifter.
Yep.
He talks about how they're basically in a lot of ways walking a very similar path. Now, granted, they're going about it from two different angles, but they're both utilizing both light and dark. Perspective is important.
Yep. And what you do with it is just as important.
Blue and Beard, would you do us the honors of starting out this book, A Man with No Name, by reading Blue. Heaven or Hell? I'll let you choose who is who.
What do you want, Blue?
I can be the ghost.
Okay, I was gonna say I can be the Drifter, so I think we'll go from there. You get first dibs with that.
Yeah, I was about to say it with the opening line. For the breadth of my formative years, I had one goal: find we all have our own word for them, my chosen, and every moment thereafter was dedicated to keeping him alive, whether he liked it or not. They were turbulent times before the last city. Before humanity found hope for the future, I was prepared to kill for it, die for it.
He opened his eyes in the night air and took an even breath. He wasn't sure how long he'd been asleep, but his immediate instinct was to
run.
He froze. The voice wasn't his.
You have to run.
The man stood up in the evening light. He looked down at himself and saw that someone had dressed him for his own funeral. He didn't laugh, but he thought it was funny. The voice continued.
Can you hear me? Risen fight for territory in these highlands. We have to move.
For the first time, he noticed a small drone buzzing in the air around him, a blazing eye at its center glowing like a blue sun. It jerked its frame to the left, indicating the light of a faraway settlement.
Head west. I have friends there. They'll help us.
The man stared at the drone, frowned, and ran the opposite direction.
What? Hey!
The voice cried out behind him. He fled into the darkness. Tall grass on either side of him flying past. The only thing he could hear was his own breathing and the loud crush of the vegetation he trampled. He was surprised at how fast he was moving. The voice called to him again, far behind him. He heard the roar of the machine before he saw it, and he didn't feel a thing as it exploded out of tall grass to the right and landed on him, crushing him beneath its bulk. He opened his eyes in the night and took an even breath.
You died.
The drone explained, hovering over him. It was smeared with a dark, filmy paste.
I brought you back.
He stood up and looked down at himself. Same clothes, nothing hurt. The hulking wreck of the machine that had killed him sat in pieces a few meters away, inside a dark, sooty crater. The body of an armored man laid sprawled over the smoking open-air cockpit, his helmet punctured by a small hole about the size of The drone,
Are you ready to listen? Let me take you to my friends.
it said.
This region is full of raiders like this man, led by Risen like you. We've got a lot of catching up to do.
What the hell are you?
The man spoke for the first time.
I'm your ghost. My only purpose is to support you.
The drone replied.
You work for me?
In a manner of speaking, yes.
Is this the afterlife?
In a manner of speaking.
The drone said, nodding at the western lights once more.
Can we go?
Not that way.
The man headed in the opposite direction. The drone watched him trample the high grass and disappear. It stared up at the massive, disfigured orb that dominated the sky, then made a small adjustment to the orbit pattern in its modular armor. It hurried after the man.
So can I just say first, before we get too far, I find it funny that they named this entry Heaven or Hell. First, a couple reasons behind that, actually. The first actually comes back to the emissary, because she actually says this line in particular during the trials back when they were available in year one. She says, I think it is just the line of Heaven or Hell, and that's it. I equated this back to a Guilty Gear sign, if anybody's familiar with the stupendous fighting game that is Guilty Gear. But they start out with the Heaven or Hell round duel 1. Let's fight. And I've always liked that as like a segue for like how to start out a fighting game. But to me, that's where I kind of always got the idea that it was like a game for them more than anything. Anyway, slightly off topic on that angle.
No.
Secondly comes into how they kind of highlight the two factors that are in this card. The heaven, in some regard, being like the ghost, and then the hell being the drifter, but also kind of simultaneously showcasing the fact that, like, is this heaven or is this hell with the afterlife that's to come? Because as we're going to kind of find with the drifter as a whole, there is something that he very well sort of finds out as time goes by about the new gift that he's been given as he's been resurrected. The other kind of cool thing that I like that they highlighted from this one, though, they state how... Let's see if I can find it here real fast. He looked at himself and saw that someone had dressed him in his own for his own funeral. If you look at the drifter's clothing right now in game, this is absolutely the case still. He's actually wearing a yukata, and this yukata, dressed as it is, off to the, I believe it is more to the right, means that you are supposed to look down at yourself and know that you are dead. So
really?
what Drifter is trying to do, if you, in ceremonial ideas of Oriental dressing and whatnot, if you dress it to the left, I believe it's signifying that you are alive, you are well. That's actually why you'll generally see Japanese clothes and whatnot. They are very ceremonial in how they're prepared, how they're put together, etc. In war times as well. If you were just going for a meeting or something, they all have it put together the same way. That is on purpose. That is meant to be a matter to say that you are a living being and you are not getting ready for your own funeral. If you were to dress the opposite direction, and you were to go into battle in a lot of rites, you were prepared to die. Like, that was the Spartans, tonight we dine in hell, basically. So that's where the ideas kind of came from, which I think is what they're sort of showcasing here with this entry, which I think is really cool. But again, if you see a person dressed like that or robed like that, it's meant to effectively signify that the spirit is to look down at themselves and realize, oh, I am dead. But here's, of course, the drifter who might have followed those principles previously, might have understood what went into them previously, and now is looking at himself and has possibly no idea about, like, what's going on with, like, why he's dressed that way or whatnot. Or that he's looking at himself and understands, this is more the interesting part, because he knows that he's dressed for his own funeral. If he looks down at himself and knows that it's a funeral robing or a funeral dress, at that point means that he remembers that dress previously from his old life, which is another instinctual piece that was carried with him via his ghost resurrection, which I think is super important to remember as time goes on. And into it, like stuff like you work for me and other knowledge like that. To me, it sounds like he was in a very similar experience like the Yakuza in a way. Or he could have had something that was very like criminal underworld-ish going on. So there are some extra pieces that could kind of be adhered to or pulled from this. The biggest thing, though, about his dress is the fact that he hasn't changed it since the day that he kind of woke up. Which I think is very interesting in that regard. But yeah, that's a super interesting piece about Drift. Like, I still say this is one of the reasons that I find Drifter to be such an interesting character, is it even comes down to his clothing choice. That ultimately he is built as this super deep and rather immersive character versus some of the other new ones that we've had. And right down to like his character presentation outside of just his story, that is how far they went with him.
That's the irony, is he presents himself as such a washout, one-off type character.
Right.
But he's got a lot more going on with him than what you initially see.
Yeah,
but
meanwhile, don't judge the book by the cover.
And that's the whole joke of like his entire premise in a way. Like, You could almost think of him as like the comedian in a way from The Watchmen. There are points and pieces where he wants to be known and whatnot, but by the end of his life, he just basically wants to like sit down and not think about anything. He doesn't want to be bothered. He doesn't want to be pulled into anything. And by the end of it, he just ends up thinking that life's all a joke, and it's all a joke. And for him, like he has similar pieces to that. I'm not comparing him one-to-one, obviously, with The Watchmen's comedian, but like there are pieces.
Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's pieces that they kind of pulled from, I think, with that character, which are more like basic pieces for character building, if you will. But in that respect, like he wants to not necessarily be acknowledged, except for by the people that will help him get the job done, which is very important as we kind of go through this book, or even with what we know about him right now. Like, take everything that you know about the Drifter so far and how he works with specific people, how we have seen that with the other notions of, like, some of the armor that's presented as well. Carry that further into what this book is all about, because this, Heaven or Hell, kind of sets up the entire, I think brilliantly, the entire book as we go forward with this, as Blue's kind of already said, the Germain saga or arc and the Wu Ming arc as well. Because from here, it's just, as the kids say, it's all downhill from here.
It's a lot of personality.
Lots of it. And it, from his dress to the way he speaks to what he does, it all has substance and it all has meaning. And that's what I think is just so incredibly interesting about the Drifter as a whole. So I could be alone in that, but that's me.
I hadn't actually picked up on the dress aspect. I knew like the whole turn of phrase of somebody dressed him for his own funeral type thing. I always thought that was amusing, but I did not know anything about, what did you call it? The
yukata.
The yukata? Okay. Yep. Yeah, that's new information. I don't expect to look at the clothing of our NPCs and see something like that. So that's super, super helpful to help clarify more of his heritage in some respects.
Well, and to point it out too, sorry, Green, there's no other character that has that, to my knowledge. Like, the only other one that could possibly, like, you look at Devrim, and yes, you think that Devrim has, like, some very good, like, heritage pieces behind him, of course. He's very proud of Trostland. He's very proud of the fact that his family has kind of owned or been in that area for a very long time. They were around for that long, 8 generations and counting. And then you end up looking maybe at Hawthorne, who has the weird poncho she does.
Yes.
But that's just more so for, like, her scouting. That's for her keeping her head down. There's nothing, to my knowledge, that really, like, fits the bill of why she would have that gear in a way. But the other clothing choices that are present in there seem more indicative of either the character class that they are, like a warlock, a titan, etc. Those have meanings all in themselves. Same with like the hunter cloaks and everything, as we kind of know too. But that is what makes Drifter's garb so interesting, is because it's him. Where so many others present themselves as organizations, Drifter presents himself more for himself. And that's pretty well all that he is about in the end. He is looking into it for himself and for trying to like bring things into like a one-for-one example, or like bring things into you. Guy hates violence. So what is he trying to do? He's trying to bring around a way to end violence.
And
like
what's he
to try
dressed
to bring
in?
understanding in a way.
He's dressed as if he's already dead.
Exactly. Like,
and so for someone who hates violence, that's really indicative too of what he sees as the entire point of it.
Yep. Like that piece alone, knowing, like I wasn't the one that had just like point of reference here, because there is somebody that deserves to like be called out on this. When Z brought up the fact to me that his yukata was dressed that way, that opened up my eyes to entirely what this character is about. And the fact that like he is built the way that he is for a large purpose. And I'm blown away by the fact that they went this in depth with it, which again kind of calls back to how the writers are working right now, how character development is working right now, and what they're attempting to showcase to us as time goes by. Like, even clothing, basic clothing choices in a way need to be thought about in how they are presented to us and how it's all put together. And for the Drifter especially, that's super important.
Yeah, and that's also, and you can see that also with Anna Bray, and the reference to Saint 14 with the same logo that has been bugging like a lot of people.
Yeah,
because like true. that's I'll be honest, that's immediately where my mind went when you started explaining the yukata and like the hidden kind of message there is like, you know, you do have you have to look at them really closely, but you do have a lot of characters that have that kind of those kind of things. I mean, with the other thing with Hawthorne that comes to mind is the tattoos.
Yeah,
because I had a conversation with I just blanked on the guy's name, but we had a conversation with a guy at GuardianCon last year about what those tattoos mean, because it's like there is nowhere that those tattoos are explained, but they are very, you know, they're significant. The placement of tattoos is very significant, and she's got tattoos on her face. Like, you don't get tattoos on your face if you don't want, you know, there's a reason you do that,
unless you're awoken.
Well, but I mean, even then you could say, I mean, like for tribal purposes,
right?
It's like, yeah, it's, you know,
it's more of a racial trait rather than a.
I'm gonna say, are those tattoos or as they say,
are they
maybe
birthmarks?
They're born with it. Yeah,
maybe it's Maybelline.
Yeah. Well, and that's true too. I always assumed that they were like war paint, but I mean, that's very fair too. But I mean, like the thing too with Drifter, the other thing, you know, in Beard, I put some questions that I had when I first read it, was like, you know, first off, the quote from the ghosts at the beginning. Are we thinking that is his ghost?
There's no clarification on it, but the next card, it's him talking, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Or it's like it's a 2-card sound. It's 2 cards down. Home 1, it's him talking.
Well, and the reason I ask is because to me it seems like it is, because you have the mention of "I will kill for it," and then in the entry you have his ghost actually headshotting a human.
That's
like,
I mean, terrifying to me.
To be clear here, I mean that's something that I also kind of want to call out. Is this is now we have a record now of a ghost killing directly. Like, this ghost just went through someone's head, and I mean I think that needs to be kind of called out a little bit there, because this is the first time that we're seeing a ghost actually do wet work, literally itself. The other thing is,
we also question what in the world the machine was that crushed him.
I'm trying to think if it was like a pike, or maybe if it was like a car that was like brought back from something, if you will, or like a pickup truck. Like, it could have been any manner of anything, unfortunately.
Okay.
but that's where I'm not sure like what I want to say it could be. But yeah, it could have been a pickup truck, it could have been a pike, it could have been something completely different altogether.
Because whatever it was, the pilot of it is the dead person that the ghost killed. Like this.
Well, and when they said like an open air cockpit or canopy, that's immediately what made me think it was a Jeep, like an old fashioned military Jeep. But I again don't know like how true that would end up being. That also goes back to like the thought that even though we've seen some older context that we still used cars in the Golden Age and whatnot, and obviously we kind of had them littered outside of the Cosmodrome in our first instance, of course, of being resurrected. I still kind of wonder how many of them were serviceable, at least for a little while, until we got pikes and until we figured out sparrows and stuff like that. Or if sparrows were in workings throughout the Golden Age and whatnot. Problem with our technology with that stuff, like we know that like early models of with like Clovis Bray and Anna and whatnot working on those like early sparrow models, that they had sparrows, but just like how defined they actually were. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Good questions. Blue, were you asking about the Raider himself? Was that the next
well, I mean, like I had a couple of different questions too. Is like, who are the friends that the ghost mentions in relation to the west of their location? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
The ghost was looking towards the settlement, right? That's what was kind of implied.
Yeah, and it sounds like it would be a settlement that it seems, at least to me, that it's implied that that would be the last city.
Possibly. The
reason I'm saying I kind of read it that way is because if you read at the end, it calls out the fact that the orb like dominates the sky. Mm-hmm. So it seems like they're in close proximity to it. Like, you know, it's not something that traveler. To the traveler. And we know that the city was originally a kind of ramshackle tent town. And it was underneath the traveler. It's like that's kind of my line of thought process there. What was that?
I was thinking further along because yes, I'll rather agree with that example than if that's the case.
I mean, it was just that was my thought process, was because this is also in the time of warlords versus iron lords, so we know that it's not, the city doesn't exist as it as the air quote city, the last city, the construction of the walls or anything like that hasn't started. But we also don't know when those tents started getting put together. I mean, they've that seems like that was kind of a early structure. Shanty town, if you will.
They start as like a couple, and then they just start to
right, yeah. And I mean, and if you watch, if you look at like the Zavala trailer, for instance, when he shows up, it's definitely it's not a city, it's a camp. No. Like it's a camp is a loose term to use for it, but it's like
as I've kind of delved into, like, the difference between a town and a city is literally, like, how many people are in it at this point.
It's a significant part.
But they've always just stated that it's been the last safe city, quote unquote. And it just sort of, like, stayed that way for a very long time, and that's how it kind of gained notoriety. Just because it's underneath the Traveler doesn't mean dingus.
Right, and I think that goes back to an old theory that the Traveler was somehow radiating something protective, but I don't think that ever got confirmed, or like it went. The last I heard, it was just like a murmur of like it was kind of like the whole rub or ruckus about the original story getting thrown out. It was just kind of a summary idea. But yeah, so that was the other thing that kind of struck me, was like the friends, that goes into my entire thought of why it's called the last safe city. That implies that there were others. But I'm not going to go down that tangent because that's a dangerous tangent. But, my next question while I was reading this was, is the Raider a part of the Iron Lords or the Warlords?
Do we even know if they were,
and that's
risen?
And then the other question is, or is it a completely different group of Risen that the Raider is?
Yeah.
Well, because the ghost says that the Raider is following the orders of Risen like you.
Yeah.
Right, but that doesn't mean the raider himself was a
No. Correct. The raider is not arisen. The raider is definitely not arisen. But
Yeah, because he gets
is the
headshotted
raider
by ghosts just ramming through his skull.
right? But my point is that is the raider a cannon fodder basically for the Iron Lords, or is it cannon fodder, or are they cannon fodder for the Warlords, or a cannon fodder for a different group entirely?
Right.
Because I mean, to be fair, also realize that you're talking about demigods here.
Right.
They're gonna have a following in the mortals. You know, the Warlords did. I would be very surprised if the Iron Lords did not as well. I mean, we know that the Iron Lords went out of their way to protect cities, and they claimed territory, as we'll later find in the Wu Ming and, you know, with Fellwinter and stuff like that. And they were territorial about that. So it would not surprise me that some of those individuals would willingly follow them into a battle, or, you know, even scouts or something like that. But I also find it interesting that it's never specified which side of the fight this particular raider is on.
Right.
I mean, in one respect, we're also assuming that those sides have already been chosen. Again, this is kind of like the time period thing. We don't know exactly the time gap. We don't know if Radagast has even formed the Iron Lords per this point or not.
That's fair.
It could just be the Risen
at this point.
Around at this point. Until we start to actually get a hold of titles, or sides start to be chosen, or fields start to be picked, etc. And especially with the way that land is kind of plucked, and the way that the Warlords kind of handle as a whole, there is like this fine line between that measure of, like, again, light and dark, and how things kind of play out. But yeah, whole point, still don't necessarily know about the the general build up of forces at this point.
Mm-hmm.
There were no Guardians, though. Like that's the big thing to point out here. There were no Guardians yet. I think that's extraordinarily fair, at least to say. And that is why Ghost says that you're arisen, which I think is also, actually, now that I think about it, fairly important to kind of mention. Because the Ghost says specifically that he's arisen like you. Doesn't say, like, and what is
doesn't say Guardian.
Right. Doesn't, like, our Ghost specifically resurrects us and says, you're my guardian and I'm your ghost. And I think that's a very kind of particular way to sort of like formulate or kind of change things. The side thing of that, though, were there ghosts, especially with some of the stuff that Drifter kind of says later on, are there ghosts that resurrected people and said, you're a warlord, let me show you how to do this?
That's like the ghost leading it, or that would be interesting.
Right. All of a sudden, like, there's some darkness amongst the light of the ghosts, per se.
Mm-hmm.
Or
again,
like,
heaven or hell. Are they angels or are they demons?
Exactly. Yeah, that title for this entry in general is extraordinarily deep and can be taken in so many different ways. The ones that I brought up already are not even close. I feel like we need to move on, because this is just the first entry,
right?
And this is a problem.
Yeah. One last thing is, I would like to also call to attention the small adjustment made to the Ghost's orbit pattern of modular armor.
Yeah.
Do you think that's just like the equivalent of like a shrug, or do you think that's something else? Do you think that might be something else because it's called modular armor? And is that a descriptive? Yeah, you know, like there's a couple different ways you can read that, and I was just curious what you guys were thinking.
Well, as we've kind of talked about previously, the Frontier Shell says that the Ghost can, like, manipulate its armor, or it can be swapped out in a way.
Correct. Yeah.
But at least in terms of, like, that motion itself, I kind of think of him, like, looking up at the Traveler and kind of going, like, what am I getting into? Like, what is going on here?
So it's kind of like an emote, basically, of the Ghost.
Yeah, he's kind of just like, Traveler, help me. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, those were my questions that I had that stood out to me when I was reading it. But
we're gonna have a lot more as we go.
Yeah, I mean, talking about heaven or hell, you know, it's a good thing to bring up Dogma, right?
Oh God.
This This entry just cracks me up more than anything, though.
It
really
shows
does.
his stubbornness.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
also super short.
it is. And I'm okay with reading this one unless somebody else wants to read it. I think it's a fun one.
I mean, we can do what we just did again. That's fine.
Yeah. I will narrate. Blue will be the ghost, and
Mhm.
Beard will be Drifter.
Sure.
He had been reduced to crawling. His ghost cut serenely through the air above him.
What the hell is wrong with me?
He demanded of the ground.
You're dying from starvation.
Ghost said flatly.
I don't believe you.
He sneered as he dragged himself over some rocks.
I could fix you.
Ghost said.
Don't need you.
He said.
I got this.
You're not going to pick a name?
Ghost asked.
Everyone picks a name.
You talk too much.
Some people pick names for their ghosts, too. What should I call you if you don't want a name?
He had passed out. The sun beat down directly overhead, a searing marble in the sky. He died a day later after a scorpion stung his prone body. Ghost allowed it. A complete restart would be less complicated. He opened his eyes and took an even breath.
What should I call you?
Ghost asked. He looked at it as if considering, then down at his hands.
I'm still hungry.
I
So
love
first,
I
I
love
would
this
just like
card.
to.
I love
I would just like to say the fact. I would just like to say the fact that I ended up telling Blue that he talks too much.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I just
Uh-huh.
love the ghost snark. He's like,
Yeah.
no, seriously, what's your name? Hey, dude.
Yeah. No.
Dude,
Hey.
dude.
Hey.
What's
name.
your
Hey.
name?
Hey. Hey. Hi.
Hey,
Mom.
you
Mommy,
can maybe name a
Mom,
ghost too.
Mom.
You
Mama,
can
Mom.
maybe name me. Maybe. It's like whose ghost is it? It's not Eva's. It's
Tyra's.
Tyra's
Tyra's.
ghost.
You want to name me? Yeah, you're named Ghost. You should name yourself. No, you should name me. I did. You're named Ghost.
Don't call me Ghost.
Don't call me Ghost.
Yeah. The thing that I love about this card, though, is it really highlights kind of something that Blue brought up really early on in the episode, in that Drifter apparently, I don't know if he doesn't remember how to eat or doesn't know why he's hungry. Like, there are basic functions that are things you would think, normal human functions. I am hungry, I should find food. He doesn't realize he's dying because he's hungry.
Hey, why are you getting ahead of us here? It's on the next card.
I know, but it starts on this card.
I love
There's a
that
reason.
quote. I love that quote on this next card.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think I don't know if there's too much more on this one besides that. Ghost. This is the card that the ghost is asking about his name.
I mean, I picked up one very important thing.
Which part?
Hey, Blue, you remember that bit about how, people seem to have picked names for reasons
Mm-hmm.
and stuff,
Mhm.
and like it was ingrained? How I said that Guardians seem like there's some sort of computer program?
Mm-hmm.
A complete restart would be less complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean,
You can read into it that way.
right.
I don't
you
know
can.
if that's the intention.
Did you turn it off and turn it back on again?
Yeah, pretty much. Like you're playing Guardian tech
What, you
support
mean-
over here.
You mean ghosts are essentially programmable computers that are just going about and controlling our every. Never mind. I'm just not
Johnny
gonna go there.
5! Need more input!
Need more input.
Anyway, yeah, no, I'm not sure if that's the intention. Obviously, it is something I have to keep my eyes on a lot
Now
more.
I have Ghost as Moss in my head.
Oh Jesus!
Don't let him near fire.
Yeah, but yeah, like the thought that Ghost would just allow it. I mean, I get it at that point, but a complete restart would be less complicated. The way that is written has such implication that it's not even funny.
Well,
Especially with some of the stuff we talked earlier on about with the invitation and players and so on. No, stop it.
Here's another theory that Lux brought up in chat with me the other day. the concept of when a guardian is resurrected, or not resurrected, but revived after a death, what point in their physical self are they resurrected at? Obviously not with all the bullet holes, or they would die again immediately. So the fact that Drifter had allowed himself to die a slow, hungry death and then died by scorpion sting, it could theoretically imply that it is more simple to resurrect him all the way back instead of resurrect him at that last point.
Yeah.
Well, and there are definitely pieces behind that you could kind of go along with. Like, look at how we are in the Crucible. It seems like it's still fairly easy to bring us back from, like, being sharded to devoid dust. You know,
and Thorn and all the other things that go along with that. But yes.
Well, one Thorn, maybe not so much.
Right.
But I know what you mean.
I know. We've had that discussion. Oh, man. Let's see. Blue, you are up for home.
Yeah, let's go home. So this one is a pretty well, it's a standard length one. But it starts with a quote that we've referenced quite a few times at this point, and it's a quote from a Dark Age drifter. And the quote says, "The light is no gift. It takes everything from you, makes you forget, not just your memories, but how to live." And in regards to kind of what Beard and Green were just talking about, there's a lot of different ways you can take that statement. You know, you can take it from a moral standpoint, which is certainly true if you look at the warlords. You can take it from a physical, which is what just happened, you know, arguably just happened there. Or you can take it from both, you know, like your general humanity is maybe removed because, again, going back to, I think even this was last week as well, Green, that we were talking about the nature versus nurture thing with Devil May Cry,
Dante, and
you know, like the whole concept of morality is arguably not something that's naturally in people. You know, there's a very deep philosophical debate that is gonna dive into. But ultimately, the argument there is that a lot of morals, especially more refined morals, are taught via society. They're actually imprinted upon an individual based off the society or the social norms that they exist within, which is where you get different cultural understandings of, you know, we were talking about the was it the yukata? Is that was that yukata? You know, there's different cultural norms. There's different concepts such as the difference between the Eastern and Western funeral rites. They're vastly different. And that is not something, and they're both human, like they're both human species. They're not, you know, nothing there, like genetically they have the same DNA as each other, but the culture that they exist within is completely different. You have, and I mean, and that's not even just, you know, that's just East-West. You also have, like, you can look at Mongols, their funeral rites were vastly different than all of them. And top of it, you have Greeks, you have Egyptians. You know, the Egyptian death rites were very, very, very convoluted and very ornate in a way. And then you have, like, the Upper European rites where it was pretty much very brutal, very, very efficient. Efficiency was key. And, you know, so each of these cultures has very different rites around that particular aspect of life, which is a natural part of life. But at the same time, it's how you handle it that's entirely dependent upon the culture in which you exist. But it's very interesting to me how that particular comment is already kind of being tossed out by Drifter. And again, with what, you know, Beard, what you were saying with the yukata, you know, but he also remembers certain things. He remembers that he was dressed for death. So there's a debate there going on. Is like, did you forget, or did you just use that as an excuse to start over?
Slightly manipulate.
Right. I mean, and there's a lot of arguments that you can make on either side of that too, right? But as far as the actual entry, what's going on here is we're introduced. So this is the first card in what I just refer to as the Germain arc. And this is actually the arc that it is really kind of really well written, because I'll be honest, the first time I read through this, I could not, for the first like 2 or 3 entries, I could not tell you which one of the characters being talked about was the Drifter. It was really well done. Yeah, it took me, I mean, like, now that now that I've read it a couple times, I definitely I immediately pick up on it, because obviously the conclusion kind of gives it away. But for the longest time, or for the first like couple times, it was it took me a little bit to kind of iron down who was the actual Drifter. So I really like that, actually, because again, it goes back to my point about him kind of ingraining himself into this village. And so this village that we're talking about is a village that is a mortal population. It seems like it's mostly human. That's an assumption, but I think it's pretty safe to assume that right now, given what we hear about within Dust and Ecdysis. Awoken are probably not very prominent right now, and Exos are a little bit more common, but not much. So it's probably mostly human. It's definitely immortal. And this village is called Eaton. It's a small village. It's it's very isolated, because basically what's happening here is that for the first time in years, they have received visitors. And these visitors are Iron Lords. And so we get introduced to a couple people here. We get introduced to Germain, who is the main storyteller, who is later revealed to be the Drifter. Judson, who is the neighbor of Germain. He's a renowned hunter or trapper of the village, and he is very outspoken against working for what he calls the Iron Freaks, which I actually really like. These are the 2 characters that I had flipped. I had thought Judson was the Drifter and Germain was the human. It turns out that's not the case, which I really like that. We also are introduced to Lord Dryden, which is a very important name. A really, really important name. Lord Dryden is the leader of the group that visits. He is the leader of the Iron Lords group. And basically what Dryden is doing is he is visiting, and he is basically paying the village to allow the Iron Lords to use them as bait against another Risen, a warlord who goes by the name of the Red Man. Personal theory here, and I'm pretty confident that I have a pretty good case to make here. I think the Red Man is Sagoth. And that is due to a reference back in Destiny 1 within the Grimoire. Sagoth is described as being a Risen who wears all red. He is described as being in red robes or red armor. And that is from the Perun Grimoire card, if I remember that correctly. We also are introduced, or we see another Iron Lord who is a female Exo, but she is never named. Potentially, the only female Exo that we actually have a name for at this point is Ashraven. But there is no connection at all to if that is who this is. But yeah, and so basically it's just an introduction to Eaton. It's the introduction to Judson flipping off the Risen, which is I thought was kind of funny. Your name is stupid, and you're stupid too. Best insult ever. from Judson to Germain. And then also just the establishment again of the characters, Judson as being the person who's opposed to helping them, and then Germain as kind of being a Germain, the best way I could say it is he's trying to keep a low profile. The other thing that you also catch on here is that Judson seems to be where Drifter gets his vernacular from. If you look at the way Judson speaks in these entries, it is how Drifter speaks currently. And the way Germain speaks in these entries is nothing like what Drifter talks about now. And that transition happens in the next couple entries, but I don't know if you guys had picked up on that as well.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the brother slips in because of that.
How you living? Well, I'm going to say how you living, the brother
the slang is definitely like
the extreme slang is definitely there for sure.
I agree with that.
It's proof further of like how, especially as time goes by, or how we kind of go along with the Drifter as a whole, he still takes his experiences and kind of learns from them, understands them,
He incorporates it,
uses them. Yeah, he uses them to fuel his general ideals and understandings as he goes along.
Which, I mean, to be fair, that is very human. Yeah. No, I mean, that's very human too. Is you take your experiences and you assimilate them into your person, and then that allows you to grow. I mean, that's arguably that's what allows you to grow as a person, right? Is your experience.
Yeah, I mean, largely, if you listen to my father and I talk, we're not too far different in how we speak, how we kind of handle ourselves in terms of like how our general presentation is as people. But I have some different tones that I end up putting in because I spent like 4 or 5 months when I was a kid down south, and occasionally that still pops out now and again. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing how that piece kind of stays with you, especially as a child. But for even as Drifter as a whole, like he's still kind of impressionable in a way because of the fact that he's a newer Risen, at least in some respects, for like what I could kind of figure. He's a fairly newer Risen. So if these are, I kind of go back to like the Doctor from Doctor Who, where the first time he opens up his eyes,
attack eyebrows.
Yep, he opens up his eyes, and the first person that he lays his eyes on, he generally has like a deeper connection with in a lot of rights. This is what happened with, especially with season 11 with Matt Smith and Amy Pond. First person that he comes in contact with is a young Amy Pond, and it's not until much later on down the timeline that all of a sudden they bump into each other again, and he is still the same Doctor, he's still the same Raggedy Man. But that is important to him the entire time that he is that Doctor. And I almost wonder if something similar like that with the Drifter up until the very end of Matt Smith's timeline as the Doctor it kind of holds true here with like what he's going on about, which I think when we get to, I think it's Home Part 3, I have further reasoning as to why that's the case. Needless to say, Judson is not the only character that leaves like a general impression on the Drifter or Germain as a whole.
Not even in this arc.
No, there's one other person that means a lot more to his overall standing, and it makes a lot more sense to why he is the way he is.
Yeah. The other thing too about Eton is that it is in the middle of not just a drought, but like a famine. It has reached a point that the adults are starving themselves so that their children could eat. So that's also, and I think that position had been going on for several months at the point that the Iron Lord showed up and offered them food. So that's the other thing is like, not only is this they're not getting paid in like glimmer or anything like that. They're getting paid in food. They're not, I mean, so keep that in mind too.
Yeah.
And they're mortal.
Yes. And unlike the Drifter, if they starve, there's nothing to bring them back.
Right. But is it in Home 1 where we learned that he has his ghost basically hide away in a different location?
That's much later.
I think that's actually like Home 3.
3 or 4, yeah. Because that's
4 is like the full reveal.
Yeah. So
right.
I think 3 is where ghosts kind of ghost gets mentioned, and then 4 is the one where he calls Ghost out because it's a mistake, like the mistake that Ghost made that led the whole thing to. But yeah, that's later in the Home arc, because Home Part 2 is where we get introduced to the other significant character in this arc.
Well, I'm gonna say, and that's where Home Part 2 opens up with, "Sir, this is awful." And I'm still trying to figure out exactly what that means. If you guys have any indication or idea.
I'm right there with you, to be honest. I'm trying to figure out who he's talking to.
Right.
I'm trying to wonder if he's kind of looking at it from like a position of Like maybe talk with Dryden or something like that afterward.
That's what I was just thinking, is like maybe he's trying, like when he's talking to either the Red Man or Dryden.
Right. Well, I don't know if he would be talking with the Red Man, because
there is the
combat.
In part 3 there was the confrontation there.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see real quick. I don't think he says that line.
He doesn't say that.
No. Yeah, no.
Which
that's the only time I could
with,
see him seeing it or saying it.
Which goes with a couple pieces. Either he had worked with somebody else. Maybe it was like when he was with his time at the Shadows or something else, and he had brought it up there. Or he was talking it over with like another person, with like scouting out or like looking over the like what's left of Eaton and so on. Or it could just be that he had a really bad bite of food and it's just awful. I don't know what it could be. With the Drifter, it's entirely possible that it's about food. Like, we're just going to throw that out there right now. When one of your entries in Delirium 21%, I think it is, or 21% Delirium, rather,
is waxing poetic about the thought of eating fallen.
Yeah, I wonder how they taste.
He's never finished a scorn, according to some of his voice lines.
He wants to, though.
He wants to. He's never finished one.
You ever seen the Vex eat? I know I haven't. They say the stuff in the center's organic. Still haven't seen it happen.
Oh my gosh.
Everything about him is like food, even if it's like off kilter or something like that. It's about food, like largely about food. Anyway, which I think plays like wholly into how his character sort of is. Yeah, part 2 is where we end up getting the other character, though, that is extraordinarily important to this Germain arc. Her name is Yu. She is 9 years old, or 9 cycles old, as they kind of say here. And she's the neighbor to Judson, who, as a whole, seems like they have a very interesting little town. It doesn't do a lot of like favors for anybody. He yells, he screams, etc., etc. And it's a lot of fun. But she holds up with Drifter on occasion just to get away from it all. And also for her parents to not feel like she's kind of endangered by this neighbor. But Drifter also seems like he's kind of in charge of the rations and such in the warehouse that's there. And she's hanging out with him, just kind of talking. He's sitting there playing a set of cards. We don't necessarily know what. I would figure something like solitaire. And here I think is where I kind of started to pick up on the fact that like Germain seems like he might be the Drifter if this is the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
only because he's messing with the cards.
That and he's also obsessed with how much food they got.
Yeah, I'm gonna say between those couple things, I'm just like, oh, okay. But the conversation between Yu and Germain, Yu is obviously younger. She doesn't really know a lot of things that are going on behind it, or like behind the situation of the Iron Lord settling in and the Warlords being around. She's effectively like sitting there kind of going, well, Judson's good with guns. Maybe he can go ahead and take out the Warlords for anybody else that comes our way. Drifter immediately just like snaps her off and says, no, you don't think like that. Get that out of your mind like right now. That's not gonna happen. But she just tries to like keep in motion of like what's happening with everything. She tries to like keep upbeat about it all. And just like generally hang out with Germain because he seems like a fairly nice person. Nothing is off-putting to this child about this character sitting there playing cards. Nothing sets her off into thinking that Germain or the Drifter is a terrible person. And I would like the old saying, like, kids are innocent and so on. They're also a fairly good judge of character in a lot of rights. And that's one thing that kind of makes me think that, Drifter, it's showcasing that he is okay with kids. He wants the kids to do well, so on and so forth. That's where I think that this is kind of like a very powerful card, just seeing this interaction between Drifter and a child.
That, and he also, like the comment about, I don't want to die. And
Yeah.
his immediate reaction is, "You won't."
Yeah.
And like,
Right.
I mean, like that speaks to me. It speaks volumes of towards where he is as a character. Like he is, you know, you don't. It's very hard to say that and not imply a degree of protectiveness, or at least, you know, friendliness. Like you don't just say that. Now, I mean, he follows up with, you know, "Hey, I'm tired. You know, why don't you go see what your parents are up to?" And
Yeah, but how he carries that on and
but
finishes
then
it.
right, but then I was going to say, but then after she leaves, it calls out also that his hands are shaking.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, to me, that speaks, again, it's that portraying the character when they're by themselves, that to me kind of speaks more volume of what they're actual, because, you know, the way you hold yourself when no one is around is generally going to be more true to what you're actually feeling or thinking, because you don't have to put on an act. Like, that's the thing. And so when you see, like it says, you hadn't noticed because it was difficult to see in the flickering lamplight, but his hands shook. Like, is it fear?
But this
Is it anger? Like, what? We don't necessarily know, but
Well, we kind of know, actually, or at least maybe not in that moment, but he's terrified.
oh
The
yeah,
emissary
I mean,
talks about that.
right. Well, no, right. But I mean, in this particular entry, we don't know. Like I was saying, like emotionally, you're not really sure where he is at this
Right.
point in the entry. Like I agree with you. I think he's fear, I think, is what it is.
You kind of get more of that sense, though, as the entry goes on, to be honest. Like, it is fear that, in a lot of cases, seems to drive his early motives. And that's the other thing that I think is important to point out about this whole situation, about him being in this warehouse and having this instance where his hand shakes, is because this is him early days, or at least like the first instance that we really know of him. Now, maybe later Drifter, where he's having this fascination with making his tapes and whatnot, is a completely different kind of right, and a different kind of person in terms of like who he is, even when nobody else is looking. He takes on the act a little bit further, besides like what it is right now with what we're kind of seeing with this point of Jermaine. And I think that's what's important to at least remember as we kind of see the character develop or go along. Times change you. That's just like all end points, basically, when it comes down to like how I think even the rest of this book kind of carries on. But the entry carries on where later that evening, Judson is actually seen leaving Eton, and Jermaine actually stops him. Drifter stops him outside of the village and basically asks him, like, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" And Judson's just basically like, "Yo, I don't trust the Iron Lords at all, and you're nuts if you think I'm going to stay here."
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple things that end up leading to it. I'll read this last little bit, though, that kind of like carries on with it. They're looking to jump one man. Just one. We got to see this through. Even the Risen can contain a fight at that scale. Judson says, "You gonna move, or do I move you?" Jermaine stepped to the side. "I'm not the law, but where are you gonna go? There's nothing but warland out there, and their prey is coming." The important piece about the way that this kind of handles, Jermaine has a choice that he could make. Drifter has a choice he could make here to effectively say, I can stop him from leaving the village, or I can effectively just tell him to go. And what we're going to ultimately see is that the choice that he could have made there, granted, is like multi-layered, like Judson leaving, Drifter not having him leave at all. This choice will come back to haunt the entirety of Eton, like as we kind of go through.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing, though, as I mentioned at the end here, or as I mentioned earlier with the point of fear, I'm a tracker, kept this town fed for years before you got here. This is Judson talking, by the way. I'll be fine, and that other Risen won't care about one man passing through. I got nothing to hide, just need to get away. If you all want to play bait for the warring dead, have a nice life. Jermaine chuckled. What's so funny? Judson sneered in that low voice again. I don't know how you do it. I almost admire you. How's that? You've got no fear. Have a nice life, brother. See you when I see you. Jermaine walked back the gate. So in this regard, that's where I kind of figured that he was all like running off of fear and whatnot, the hand shaking and whatnot, kind of gives that overtone of like what he's going for. That was at least my first indication that like early Drifter is unsure about anything that's happening here. Could that have been remedied though by him following Ghost and understanding more of like what the Risen were about, or what the Iron Lords were about, or what the Warlords were about? We don't know, because he still very much wants to be on his own, and he's kind of just wanting to choose to live life as like a normal human being, which there's a part in 4 that we'll get to eventually that I think is important to call out with that. Anything else with 2 that you guys wanted to add?
I think that's...
I think that's good.
Okay.
Green, did you have something?
No. It's just continuing on from 2 to 3. The fears that Drifter had get more manifest in 3, or at least they're realized in 3 a little bit more. The entry for Home 3 starts out with a person, we don't know exactly who, but they approach Drifter, or at least we assume
Judson. This is Judson.
Is it Judson?
Yeah,
the second one?
This is the red man. This is the red man catching Judson.
Okay.
This is where Drifter's ghost makes the mistake.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Judson gets confused for Drifter, and
got you.
that's where they backtrack to Eaton.
You think I'm a one of you, brother? You got another thing coming? Let's see here. No water for miles. Yeah.
Because he's basically because Judson. I mean, to be fair, Judson does try to skirt around showing them back to Eaton,
right?
But like he's like, but then the red man's like, yeah, you're coming with me, and then he's like, I plan to scout the valley by myself, but now I think I'll bring some friends.
Right, and then the 6 warlords show up.
Right. Yeah.
And they dismount their machines, whatever machine they're riding, whether it's pikes or sparrows or whatnot.
I would, going back to like the Lady Perun card, I would almost say at this point I would be tempted to say pikes, because that's what they were at least on in that card. And considering what we know of the outcome of this battle now, I would say that they were pikes at least at this point.
I'll be honest. I keep reading the warlords as riding the brute choppers from Halo 3.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, I'm sorry, but like every time I hear the warlords like riding up on I'm like, all I can see is the brute choppers. Like I just
Oh god.
So I ruined that headcanon for everyone, sorry.
Yeah, you did.
Yep, that's it. I think book's over, people. We can pack it up, going home.
Yep. Oh my gosh. Okay, so
where's Sarge when I need him to chew on his cigar and tell me to go home?
Oh my god.
For a break, he flew pretty good.
Oh Lord.
So yeah, so basically the red man he threatens to torture Judson, and then that's how they get back to the Eaton.
But Judson isn't hurt. Like, you realize a little bit later, like, Judson...
he buckles.
Yeah, torture's the wrong word. He doesn't torture him.
No.
No. He says...
basically just interrogates him a little bit.
Right, he says...
Takes him with,
But he does threaten him with torture. He said, you could tell me, or I could start cutting. And that's when he's like, well, maybe you missed something. And Red Man, Sagoth, whatever you want to call him, says, you're coming with me. I plan to scout the valley myself, but now I think I'll bring some friends.
Right.
And then that's where it then transitions into Eaton, and this is where they basically come pulling Judson. They come like to me, it's like they're like in the old West wagon. They have him like trussed up and they throw him like I don't know. Like this is like to me, it just like makes sense. And they basically are like, all right, who's this dude, and like where are the warlords, or where are the Iron Lords, or does anyone want to claim this runt? Is what they say. Yeah,
that's the line. What cracks me up is now I have the head canon of the opening of Skyrim where Judson's on the freaking cart riding
in. Yes. Todd Howard, you did it again.
Dragon.
I'm just laughing now. We're ruining people's headcanon at this point.
We got Halo 3, we got Skyrim in here.
Right.
That's it.
But, like, okay, so Redman basically throws him down. Drifter actually kind of stands up for him.
Well, Drifter claims him. He's like, does anyone want to claim this front? And Jermaine's like, yeah, we will. And then that's when they kind of are like, well, we're the Iron Lords. And Jermaine just kind of is like, well, yeah, they paid us food. There's like no resistance at all.
Right, but it's the weighing of the odds. Like, if he doesn't say anything, things could theoretically go bad. But if he says something, because if the Red Man or Sagoth is truly wanting to go after the Iron Lords and nothing is there, theoretically they could let them go. Yeah. So,
and then you get to see the warlords for what they really are.
Right. Also, Drifter's snarky. Hand to my heart.
And ironically, also kind of fearless.
Yeah.
Because, like...
Well, he got pushed into a corner.
Well, I'm going to say, like, he's there, he's got to hold it together, etc. But I know with... there it is. Because he says, they were here, you're right, they were here, but they're long gone. We paid them for supplies, they moved on a week ago. Did they? The Red Man raised his hand cannon and shot Yu's father in the head. The entire crowd flinched and huddled together as the man fell backward. Yu's mother cried out in fury but held her child tight. Hand in my heart, Jermaine said, holding his breath as he waited for the hidden Iron Lords to make a move. So, like, right there, he's holding it together, he's doing what he needs to, he knows that he can go ahead and take these guys out if he has to, but he makes the choice not to involve himself still. He's still trying to blend in as much as possible in that regard.
Which is not a terrible strategy. It's
not. It's
no. I mean, when all is said and done, it's 6v1 if it were just him versus the warlords.
Right.
But like, end of the day as well, like, him going from like this fearful feeling that we see in part 2 and then going to part 3 this way is just a very easy, a very interesting, rather, juxtapositioning that I kind of call out.
I mean, it's a reinforcement for what we learned from the emissary again. Like, I'm just stuck. I'm stuck up on that because the emissary is just like, he hates confrontation essentially, and that is something we're seeing over and over here. Now, granted, he hates confrontation to the point where if there's going to be a confrontation with others, where others are involved, where others can get hurt, he's going to make a decision and make a move in some way, shape, or form to help stop it.
Yeah.
It may not be violent, or it may be violent. It just depends on the situation, because Drifter is the opportunist. He's going to make the best of any situation he can.
Right.
But is there any other thing on this one? Because there's a couple. I mean, the fight scene happens. The ghost.
And I actually want to call out. I think one of these warlords is Thalia, who is yes, because a third warlord pulled the glaive out of Judson's hands and stabbed him in the side with a gauntlet blade, and then hurled him backwards over the machines. Thalia, to this point, is the only Risen that has been described as having a gauntlet blade. Now, again, very, 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 very weak connection. I'm not gonna go like die on the hill over that connection by any means. But I did find it interesting that it was pointed out that it was a gauntlet blade. Like, it was an odd thing to be mentioned. Like, you know, it's like, it's stabbed him in the side with a gauntlet blade, not just stabbed him in the side. Like, they made a point of calling out the type of weapon. And then with Thalia, we have mentioned that, so Thalia is the Risen who is mentioned with the, I think it's a Liar's Handshake, Hunter arms, for those who are interested in that connection. Thalia and her posse, basically, there's 3 of them. There's, I always cannot remember Otto, Thalia, and then Ario, the crazy warlock that's always with them. I can't ever remember his name, but Otto is the guy who has the big van, and there's the three of them, and they're never specified as being really on either side of the warlord or the Iron Lord fight, but they are called out as being risen. Mm-hmm. So there is a kind of a possible connection there that they would be around at the same time as these, and those three have in other entries been the ones stealing things from settlements for supplies. They're known to steal supplies and then escape from whatever law enforcement is present. So it's not, to me, it would not be out of character for Thalia to be kind of involved with Sagoth or the Red Man at this point.
The sad thing that at the very end of this, and which comes up in later cards, is the last scene between Drifter and you. Yeah,
and this is the part where Beard and I had mentioned this character being very important to Drifter.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read the little paragraph of where this is. And this is like right towards the end of the battle. Everything's just burning, essentially. There's explosions, gunfire, and this is where we're going to start. Through it all, the ghost saw one of the men emerge out of the discharge of an errant explosive device, cradling the body of a child. He moved to relative safety behind one of the shacks and knelt down, holding an ear to the child's face. She was trying to speak. One of the armored riders in the town square raised a heavy machine gun in one hand and raked the length of Eaton with the golden tracers. The ghost lost visibility on the townspeople as the hall of machine gun fire filled his vantage point with a rolling cloud of dirt and dust. The annihilating, sense-shattering explosions came soon after, and the ghost increased its elevation. It waited until long after the battle had died out and the surviving Risen had all left, before lowering itself back down to earth. It wasn't even sure which side had won. It didn't matter. The day had turned to dusk. So I know we learn more about the death of you in the next card, but this is the scene where you see Drifter basically is trying to, or Germaine is trying to save the child, or at least hear her last words.
Remember what they are.
Mm-hmm. It's just, I'm like, I love my Drifter. It makes me happy that he has the soul.
Like I read this and I lost my mind on like this particular connection. And then I remember when I was doing the Thorn quest and that audio tape dropped and I was like, oh my God. I can't remember if I messaged you, but I was like, it's the thing. It's the thing. Mm-hmm. They're making the connection. And I'm like, because this seems like such a telling point, but granted it is only one point until those audio logs dropped. And then we found out that, he still remembers Yu's last words. He still remembers vividly this entire event. And to put that in perspective, this is in the middle of, like, arguably around the middle of the Dark Ages. Like, this is a long freaking time ago. And he remembers this very vividly. And so to me, if anything, this is one of the, if not in the top 5, this is definitely one of the shaping catalysts for the Drifter's character to become as jaded as his character is. Because what you just read about the ghost coming down and being like, it wasn't even sure which side had won. It didn't matter. Because the people who matter are all dead. And that's the thing that you have to remember. The Drifter is integrating himself with the mortals. He's integrating himself with those who are being trodden on by these demigods. They are the ones that are getting the short end of the stick. They're the ones that are being punished in this war. They're not, the warlords and the Iron Lords, they die and they get resurrected. They don't care. They don't feel the pain of the final death that these humans do. And that's what, it seems like Drifter is just being constantly reminded that they don't care. And that's where you see the whole thing of him wanting to find a way to end the war of light against light, which, will go into the whole thing about the monoliths and his running with the shadows and his, like, everything stems from, and I do also have, once you read the rest of this arc and then read the Wu Ming arc, also kind of backs my personal theory on this. But I really think this is the point where Drifter kind of is like, okay, enough's enough. Like, he puts, he in his own way, he starts taking an action to kind of bring a form of justice around, at least for this particular in this incident.
Yeah, and I think justice is absolute proper word.
Oh yeah, no, like what is? Oh yeah, loose ends is like, I read that and I was like, I was sitting there and I was cheering him on. I was like, yeah. You do that, especially that last card. Oh my gosh, yes.
It definitely gives a little bit more behind my favorite Iron Lord for sure.
The Dark Horse.
Oh, I can't wait to get there.
Speaking of which, going to home 4?
Well, before we get there, the last line for you is actually in the Allegiance quests. So if you guys haven't done that, that is definitely a worthwhile, and it's not too hard to actually get done. Not in Thorn. Just wanted to at least.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
It's the Allegiance one. Yeah.
It all kind of blends together.
Yeah, those all blended
really
together.
Easy, honestly, I did both of them around the same time, so I get it.
So I'm right there with you. Right
there with you.
But yeah, so like,
if nobody wants to know what the last words of you were, you can skip ahead like 10 seconds. I'll just say them now. She said, "I can't feel anything."
I mean, here's the thing is, like, again, especially being a parent, that like brings a whole new level of emotion to it. But I mean, I'm
gonna say, I don't have that necessary connection outside of like another loved one that, pretty well died in my arms, so I kind of get it. But in that regard, like, hearing those kind of words will absolutely change you forever. So that's the major thing,
especially from a child. Like, that's the thing is like, it's, and I don't mean to detract from not children, but like children, I'm a firm believer that you should not have to experience that. Like, no one should experience a child dying. Like, that's children, call me idealistic, call me whatever, but children should not have to do that. Like, a child is, you had mentioned this earlier, the child is innocent. The child is, is joyful. They should be having a happy life. They should be, they shouldn't be in a situation like this. Which, I mean, I can go on a huge tangent about that, but that's where, to me, especially what you're saying, I agree wholeheartedly with, because the other thing also is, like, I can't help but imagine how it was said. And it's like, that just, I mean, it just rips a hole in me, to be honest.
I'm going to say, consider who is saying it at the time.
Yeah.
Of, like, there's no other nice way to say it. This is a dying kid. Like, I don't even want to imagine how long, like, he probably goes to sleep at night and is now immortal.
Well, and that's right.
That moment,
and that's what
and over.
And that's the thing that, like, to me is like, and again, to hammer this home just a bit more, it's not a death of natural causes. This is a death of violence. Like, this is, I mean, because
preventable
violence that arguably he could have prevented. Like, there's a couple points there in that event, that lead up, that if he had made a different decision, it could have gone differently. But the other thing too that sticks out to me is that when Ghost saw this, he was coming out of an explosion. It wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't like, I mean, this was something equivalent of like a grenade or a landmine, like that. And those are, I mean, those are not clean. I'll just say that. No. But yeah, so Home 4 is, I think, Beard, you had mentioned it. Home 4 is pretty much the big reveal. Like, everyone, it's kind of all cards are on the table. Interestingly enough, Yudson is still alive. Like, I don't really know how he managed to do that.
But Yudson he's a risen, isn't he?
No, he's just a tracker. He's just a human. Because that's what he calls out. He calls him out. He calls Jermaine out. He says, "You were one of them all along." And Jermaine's like, "All my lives." And then Yudson kind of like, he blames Jermaine. And this is where Jermaine kind of shifts into the drifter that we're kind of more familiar with, because he says, "You got us killed, you son of a," and then Jermaine kicks because Yudson has a hand cannon on him. And Jermaine, he said, and he knelt down to point a finger. No, that one's on you. Those warlords caught you. What else were they going to do? I wanted to stop you from leaving, but I didn't think I had the right. And so it's like, you kind of get a sense that Drifter is, I mean, he's deferring the responsibility of the thing, but he's also kind of, he does say, "I wanted to stop you, but I didn't think I had the right." And then,
which is interesting, because we have our whole thing when it comes to the Allegiance quest itself, given the choice.
Right.
We're given the choice. And he's always had this kind of moralistic streak of, I'm not going to force you to do anything. You make your decision.
Drifter,
you cover
Drifter
you.
Does?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You choose you.
And
those consequences.
Oh, go for it, Beard.
All the way to the end of what Green was saying with the Allegiance quest, for sure. Like the ending, since I still have that kind of like spark heavy in my mind right now. The ending selection for siding with the Drifter is he kind of just like sides you a package and says, "Thanks for sticking with me." It's all your choice in the end and like what you do, but like end of the day, he's got your back, you've got his, but his ideas are still very like non-violent in that regard. Like he doesn't want to meet violence with violence. He very, as stupid as this is going to sound, he's very much the Gandhi of this time, because he's like I'm going to avoid violence as much as possible, but I'm not this is where he's not like
he's not going to roll over.
Yeah, I'm not going to like let things go, and if there is some way I can get it to be taken care of, I'm going to get it taken care of by parties that are interested in doing so. What he's doing is no different than what the Traveler is doing in a lot of rights. It is no different whatsoever in how Ghosts handle. It's no different in how Warlords handle in some regards, except he's not carrying it out. He is seeing an end path to it all via one reasoning and one overall right, and that is justice. He is only concerned with that one word in a lot of rights, and I guess to a point too, honor, which goes back into his overall feeling and goes back into his overall possible previous life that he had. As I had mentioned with like the yukata and whatnot, it's not a non-traditional piece of clothing that an Oriental would wear. It just is not.
Well, especially with the significance, like you were saying, with the way it's tied. Like there's a certain degree of familiarity that you have to have with that tradition to understand what that means.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know if it's like Shinto priest or something otherwise.
Right. Oh my gosh, that would be so crazy.
Well, and considering how Shintoism actually falls into, I'm not going to start this.
You and I will go down that tangent bad.
I will stop myself there. Green, take it away.
Home 4. You see also Ghost kind of gets snippy with him at the end. And he actually has some heat behind him, because he says, so Yudson dies, during which Drifter makes a few really telling comments. He says, "Do you see how he never gives up? Because he knows this one life is all he has. No fear. Those risen out there, they'd be long dead if they were him. All they know is war. This man survives." And then he says, so then Yudson dies because he's wounded. You also get the Drifter using solar light to heal his wound, which was a very very interesting.
It's the only time we necessarily see him use his powers in some way.
Which then, other than resurrection, he doesn't.
Yeah.
He never uses his powers really. And then he goes on. He says, "You wanted me to save him. Even if this works, he could never show me how to live. Not like he lives, and that's on you." And this is him talking to his ghost. So he's directly telling his ghost, like, he's like, "No, this my inability to understand the existence that this person is able to enjoy, that's because of what you did to me." And then again, Ghost makes adjustments to his orbiting armor. He scans the village. There are no, or he's looking to see if there's any other risen. And then Ghost makes the comment that maybe you should have told him you were bringing livestock in for 100 leagues away and releasing them for him to catch. So you find out that Germain is actually the reason that Judson was lauded as a successful hunter. It wasn't because Judson was super good at hunting. It was because Germain was going out of his way. And I now have this like image of Ghost transmatting cows back to the area for him to catch and bring home. So he was actually supplying this village by proxy, basically.
I mean, just like all the guns we hold, where does Ghost put that stuff?
Anyways,
does he put the cow in an engram and then unravel the engram back in the area?
No, I have that picture in my head. It's a moogram.
Anyways, it's a moogram?
Yeah, it's a moogram.
I hate you.
It's almost like a moogle, but it's a moogram. Anyways.
Oh, no.
Anyways.
Come
on! He goes, and so Ghost kind of like, maybe you should have told him. And then Drifter's like, did you see how happy he was? How happy they all were? They got to eat. Give someone something to chase, and you give them purpose. Which is, I think that's amazing. Like,
also
amazingly insight. Oh, no, yeah, but it's insightful for both his own way and also how aware he actually is. And then Ghost challenges him again and says, you're pathetic. This is what you aspire to be, a perennial liar who plays house with refugees? These people are dead because of us. And he goes on to say, you could be so much more. Let me show you how powerful your light can become. To which Drifter just basically ignores him. And then he flips off the Traveler, which is amazing. And this is also where you start seeing the coldness of Drifter, because he says, at the very last line of this entry is he's looking at the Traveler after he's flipped it off, and he says, "How you livin'?" he said, and gave a smile to the heavens that ended at his eyes. So I mean, it's again like. I get the sense of like that mythological hero or whatever, but it's a mythological tragical hero who is more than what he is. It reminds me a lot like, so I'm reading the Odyssey with my son, and Odysseus throughout the whole thing he's described as this very next to godly character, but he's constantly having to blend in. He's constantly having to use his intellect, to survive the trials and tribulations of the decade-long journey, blah, blah, blah. And this is really what it reminds me of, because the entire time, if you read it from Odysseus's standpoint, Odysseus is so much more than what he's pretending to be, but he has to pretend to be it in order to survive the trial. And in a way, he's having to integrate himself into something that he is innately not a part of, and he will never be a part of. And it's that conflict, that internal conflict that to me at least has always proven to be very interesting, because it creates this friction, and it's a story, it's a psychological, it's a narrative friction that really, that's where you see a lot of really cool character development. And I think that's where we see in this particularly, I think this is where you see a lot of growth for Germain, who then becomes Wu Ming, who then will become the Drifter, or Dredgen, all the titles, Eli, all the titles that he holds or names that he holds. He's the entire thing is about him trying to find. I mean, ultimately, it's just like everyone else. He's trying to find a place that he can fit in. The problem is like his natural, quote unquote natural place is up on a pedestal, and he doesn't want to be there. He wants to be on the ground with everyone else. And it's like this weird juxtaposition of like, where he belongs is not necessarily what he wants to be, which is a very classical trope for a lot of heroic tales and tragic tales too. I'm thinking like, again, Odysseus, you got, Orpheus, you have Oedipus. Oedipus Rex was a huge thing that, once you get past like the whole self-fulfilling prophecy, ultimately too, part of that is because he's trying to prevent things. Agamemnon from Skepiles, there's a lot of different myths from the Greeks, especially, that this is exactly what's happening. Is they don't want to be where they are, but they need to be where they are in order for them to kind of further their own story. And so I see a lot of that kind of very, very kind of interesting connections with the Drifter within the Germain arc, and even moving into Loose Ends, which is the next entry. Loose Ends is the introduction of the Wu Ming arc, and I think is it Beard? Are you taking that one?
Beard's got first one on it.
First one on that one.
So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, this is my favorite arc of all of this.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I think for a good majority of reasons, this actually turns into my favorite arc of almost the entirety of this, not just this book, but this annual pass, I think, so far, to be honest. It starts, though, by saying, "I never forgive, and I never forget. I live a hard life, sister." A Dark Age Drifter. Question is, of course, who he's referring to, but considering who else he may be able to talk to with time, and who we kind of see over the course of either this entry or the next, or even with some of the others involving Drifter, it could be any number of people at that point. It could be Aphrodite for all we know. But that being said, we get into this first entry, and this is now a man named Wu Ming. He runs a bar, and at this bar, which is at the foot of Fellwinter Peak, he basically runs it without the acceptance of the Iron Lords, and he doesn't really care necessarily who comes to visit, ghost or not, but he kind of prefers the non-ghost customers. That being said, apparently the Warlords have kind of moved back into the area of the Iron Lords of Fellwinter Peak, and what we kind of see is him not exactly being too happy about the fact that they're there, but he still welcomes them in. But there's a 5530 unit that greets these three figures at the door that says, "Welcome to the end of the world," which is what he names his bar. Which I find is almost like a callback to maybe like World's End with Simon Pegg and whatnot, but probably not. But anyway, headcanon and whatnot, of course, at this point. No shots have been fired and whatnot for like the possible like warlords coming back in, but this is the first time that we sort of see these guys show up. And if you pick up on it, Blue mentioned at the end of Home Part 4 that Drifter had a smile that went from that ended at his eyes. Well, Wu asks these guests, "What can I get you?" given a smile that ended at his eyes. So if you're paying attention, you could pretty well already pick up on the fact that Wu Ming is the Drifter. We also kind of already realized this because Wu Ming is also said to be the Drifter from a couple other entries, if you dependent, like, of course, what order you read the books in or what order you read some of the entries in. But being that this is one of the last books that are kind of available to us, I'd figure you'd probably already have that knowledge under your belt if you've been following along up till now. But again, Wu Ming has a smile that ends at his eyes. It's the Drifter. He's basically hulked over by these three warlords, and they say, "Give us all your food now."
It's always about food.
Yeah, it's always about food. And Wu says, "Sure, that'll be, well, a lot of glimmer. You don't understand, the giant man said, grabbing Wu by the lapels of his storm coat. Give us everything you have in the back or we'll gut you and eat you alive. From here, we have one of my favorite entries for anybody walking in the door. We have a certain Iron Lady that pops up through the door. And she says, "Hey, Saitan," which we know this name from a couple years back at this point. Pick on someone your own size. The irony of this...
I love it.
The irony of this is not only the fact that this would mean that the Drifter is kind of a small dude for being a guardian, but it's also the fact that we know that Aphrodite's also kind of tiny.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious. But yeah, she calls him out, and Wu Ming's just like, I'm not feeling this. I don't like this whatsoever.
Braced duck.
He braces himself. He ducks under the bar. He's like, forget it. I am out. You guys do what you need to. And that's it. Funny enough, we know about this lead up already. Drifter's already commented on the fact that, man, I haven't seen a firefight like that since I saw Lady Aphrodite walk in and break up my bar. And that was like one of his more popular lines that you can get now and again after you're done with Gambit, I believe. That's when he kind of says that one. But just the absurdity of some of the stuff that's going on here. Like, food gets brought up again. You got Lady Aphrodite walking in going, pick on someone your own size. You're just like, Effie, you wanna not? Because that's just a no. You've got Drifter that's just like, I'm still staying out of this. Like, this is just, nope, I'm not doing this. And also the fact that Drifter ran a pretty popular bar, or at least like off and on popular bar, and he did it all in spite of the Iron Lords telling him no, but he did it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I think that just sounds that sounds off mounds for the Drifter, and how he's just like, yo, I don't give a what you're going to tell me. I'm going to do it anyway.
Yep.
They had never given him permission. He had never asked.
Yep. But that is at least all I've got for that one. It's more of like a setup piece.
It is.
We were like really involved with the last few because they mean so much for the character as the Drifter. I feel like Loose Ends is like the joke that's leading to a punchline.
And it is
a very bronze shotgun punchline.
I mean, the punchline, which, I mean, God, it's the best pickup line I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, that one too.
We're not there yet. We get that in Loose Ends too.
I know, which we're almost there.
Well, I mean, I'm done if you want to go.
Oh my God, so...
She does.
Yeah, I do. The whole thing with Drifter in Loose Ends is Drifter has set up this whole thing. You find
that's amazing how he does that.
Everything has been found. I think you find out in this one that he's literally set up for Aphrodite to come in while he knows Saitan's going to be in there trying to collect on whatever Saitan is trying to collect on. But Aphrodite, of course, comes in kind of hero in her own way without just being heroic. She's just snarky. End of the world is Wolf's territory. So she's basically staking her claim over it, even though technically he's not supposed to have the bar. But they're going to take care of him. Mm-hmm. And so is the entire... And so she's just taking claim of it. What's up, Beard?
Well, that also kind of goes along with what we find a little bit more like cemented with, and I'll kind of jump ahead a little bit with the Iron Decree. Like, that's just at least in, like, what the Iron Lords are supposed to do in a lot of rights. It's something I kind of focused on in my recent video a little bit. Like, we, at least to my knowledge, don't have, like, understanding of, like, if the Iron Lords started the settlement of the city, so to speak. But one way or another, the residents of the city and the Iron Lords kind of had very similar ideals in mind. So they kind of like worked together in that respect. That's where, overall it's basically Drifter knows that if he can get away with it, he's going to do it. Oh shoot, something we didn't cover actually in Home Part 4.
Mm-hmm.
How Drifter is able to like change his posture as much as he does. Like he blends in, he like slumps over and whatnot. He tries to like blend in with the way that they kind of all sort of act and handle themselves.
Oh yeah, that's also in the Allegiance quest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and it's also at the one of the Warlock Honor book.
You're right.
Entries.
Yeah. That's the where he's pretending to be an older individual. I love that one.
Throughout that opening, it actually says how like he changes his gait, his posture, everything, just so he can attempt to like blend into everything.
And actually, he does that with the narrative previews as well. When he sneaks into the research and also sneaks into the consensus meeting.
Right. Yeah, there's all these like little and actually it involves himself with Honor's work by putting on an obsidian mind helmet, which immediately makes me think that he actually is a warlock. But anyway, like these couple pieces that kind of like are I think integral to point out about like how he does this. He has the Iron Lords fooled into thinking he's not a guardian or not a risen, rather, in that respect. And I think that's important to point out, that he's got them fooled enough that they're willing to kind of honor and protect him, thinking that he is just a regular human being.
Well, the other thing on top of this is that he's not the only one committing deceptions.
Right.
Well, and that gets called out too.
Absolutely.
Are you talking about Dryden?
I was actually talking about even with Aphrodite within this one, because in Loose Ends 2, the line where underneath the helm, Saitan's eyes flickered from the Iron Lady to his warlord ally's position behind her. The flanking warlord raised a massive hand cannon and thundered a bullet, there's like dashes, directly into Saitan's chest. So it makes it sound like Saitan's allies were not actually his allies after all, and were siding more so on Aphrodite's side. Now, granted, Aphrodite basically puts them all down afterwards.
No. See, I thought I read it because she ducked. He shoots, but she drops to a knee. Yeah, she drops to a knee, and she basically dodges.
She just action heroes.
Yeah, I mean, again, she's
being an action hero.
There's that too.
Look, she's Rambo, except she does it with a hand cannon. She doesn't have to look.
And she's like 4.5 feet tall, but
yeah,
right. But she takes them all out.
Oh yeah, no.
Which,
but yeah.
I mean, it being too that like the Drifter is Asian. I know it means like nothing to like how all of this would be, but I really do envision that Aphrodite is this angry Japanese lady. Like, that's exactly what I think of the more that I think about how Aphrodite is. Like, I know that means nothing for like where they are at this point and how the Iron Lords probably came together. But that mental image in my mind, I'm like, she's this young, angry
she's
little Japanese. Yes, absolutely. Like, she's this young little Japanese girl that's just like, I am pissed at everything. She's Go-Go in Kill Bill Volume 1.
With the mace, the ball and chain.
Anyway, carry on. I'm sorry.
Now I really want Aphrodite's ghost to be named Mushu.
Oh no.
But carry on, Green. Carry on.
Sorry, Green.
It's okay. I'm just laughing because now I have that line of that. I don't do that tongue thing.
don't do that tongue thing. Dishonor on you. Dishonor on your house.
Dishonor on your family.
Dishonor on your cow.
Considering later, I don't mean to jump ahead, but like when all of this is done, she has her ghost turn on music.
Oh yeah.
It just all falls into place.
Yeah. God. Okay, so like she takes everybody out. Everybody else freezes. She basically controls the room, yells at them, tells them that they're okay to go.
Oh, she does more than that. She threatens their ghosts.
Oh, she does.
Which is amazing. She lets
You're
the
free
ghost
to go, but you're risen. Stay with me.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Follow the Iron Decree, and you'll get them back in time.
Which
also is interesting because that means that the ghosts are held to the Iron Decree as well.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, and as an aside, it also means that ghosts don't have to resurrect their guardians right away, which also makes me wonder how long the light stays within them before it starts to kind of like fade out, or if something like Thorn has to act on them in order to like drain their light altogether.
Right.
Yeah, I just wonder how much of that kind of holds true, which is also counter to like what we saw with, and I know I keep going back and forth with like Honor and whatnot, but I think that this is kind of relevant in a way. They use like those arc straps on ghosts to disable them and keep them like held. I wonder how much of that is to kind of do this same thing with like the Iron Decree and whatnot, just taking it to a different level. Like the Praxics act more like a warlock special forces or cop force than anything else.
Yeah.
In that regard. But I just wanted to at least kind of call that out. Like they're trying to work on these labels for ghosts to keep them in hand and keep them to a standard. That's the word I'm looking for here. Versus some of like any some of the warlords that like hold them and whatnot. Like the ghosts are as Blue had said, like held to the same standard as the decree, as I know the mention is here in the entry as well. But also that they're just as liable for the actions of their risen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's because I think that's also just to me that's just interesting that she tells the ghost that as long as they hold to the Iron Decree, they will get them back. Because it's like the Guardians are dead, or the Risen are dead. Yep. Like they're not gonna be held to an Iron Decree because they can't do anything.
Right.
So it just, to me, it makes, I really want to see what that Iron Decree is, to be honest. Like I'm very curious. I'm curious what it actually involves.
It's sort of like that in the Green. What's the thing for the Yangla Way?
The
Amrita Charter.
The Amrita Charter. Yeah.
Yeah. That's another thing I would love to see, like in full on paperwork. Like we've got these couple different things that I'm just like, oh my god, these back documents could explain so much. Let me see them, please.
Right. It's okay. So that would help for certain. There's a lot of things when it comes to like the Iron Lord and their, not just their decrees, but the establishment and the histories that go along with them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole your mention of the music being played, that happens right after everybody starts filtering out. Aphrodite's ghost pulls up an old hymn, which is one of Scory's, Lady Scory, if you remember from D1. She was one of the other Iron Lords, the Bard. It's just like, in my mind, I don't know why, but I've got some very particular hymns stuck in my head, which are not pleasant to walk out to. It's more like a funeral hymn kind of thing going on. So it's
I was totally hearing Hell's Bells, but that works too.
I mean, if you call Hell's Bells a hymn, sure.
Well, remember what is said on Nessus? Do you remember that gate that we stand with the Vex?
Yeah. And
it's like, they're playing ancient Golden Age music. At least they have good taste.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I also remember Failsafe trying to sing an aria, so, there's that. Asher loved it.
Yeah.
Good.
Failsafe, you're projecting on all channels.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know why Failsafe turned into Claptrap, but it works.
I mean, if Failsafe's personalities merged, wouldn't you think we get Claptrap out of it?
And open.
So this is going okay. So can we just read the pickup line starting where
Green just really wants everyone to appreciate this pickup line.
It's just so stinking clever.
Yeah.
Can we start where Ephraim says, "Is this why you asked me here?"
We can. I'm just seeing if I felt like there was one thing before we got there. I don't know why.
This was, you had mentioned that Drifter had set everything up because he pays Aphrodite.
Right. This is and that's what this will start with. It kind of goes down a little ways because technically the pickup line is towards the bottom, but
probably I'll be Drifter again.
Okay.
If Blue wants to be our narrator this time.
Oh, then you mean you want me to read the girl part? Yay!
Why not? I mean,
yay!
It makes sense. I'm not. There's why would I not do this? Anyway,
typecasting.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, I'd love to
Shakespeare.
I'd love to hear Blue read Aphrodite. That would be interesting. No,
I mean, we could go along with it. That's fine.
It's okay. I got this.
But I'm just saying, we got somebody that fits the part.
I mean,
as well.
Yeah, the short one in the back. Is this why you asked me here?
Aphrodite said, holstering her weapon.
You said you had some business that paid.
I did. You just finished it.
He responded, reaching out with a fistful of glimmer. The Iron Lady stared down at it, gawking beneath her helmet.
Who the hell pays you?
I have, Mean.
Wu Ming said, chuckling.
Stick with me, sister. I'll make you rich. I promise.
She eagerly took the sapphire cubes out of his hand. Glimmer represented pure material potential.
You didn't bring Fellwinter,
Wu said. She eyed him.
I told you he never comes down from the peak unless it's official Iron Lord business. What do you need from him?
Hey, what are you doing later?
Wu asked suddenly.
Hunting Fallen? They're becoming a problem at Boyle's Pass. We'll be at it till dusk.
Aphrodite said, lifting the helmet just above her mouth to grab a drink from behind the counter and swallow an entire mug of the malt Wu served. She belched and asked,
Care to join us?
Her smile just beneath the helm was all teeth. Wu chuckled.
Nah, a mere mortal in a risen fight. I'd just get in the way.
He thought for a second.
Would you like to dance before you go?
Nah,
she said, imitating his tone. The helm came down. The helm came down. He cocked his head over the music and then leaned in to ask.
Wait, what did you think I said?
Would you like to dance before you go?
She repeated.
I would love to.
He said, stepping forward, arms wide.
Best pickup line ever.
I just love the fact that her helmet stayed on, too.
Yeah, mostly.
I feel like you need to finish this because the ending is hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
She sighed.
Yeah, she sidestepped him and kicked his leg out from under him. He went tumbling to the ground and someone spilled their drink on him.
I had to try.
He called from the floor, watching her go. The plume of her helmet rose above the crowd and was already halfway out the door.
Take the bodies!
He yelled, still on the ground.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that whole interaction.
Take the bodies!
Take the bodies!
Oh, gosh. I know people are like, Drifter's got such a bad rap. I freaking love Drifter more and more because of this book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Beards might have been the one that said it, but this book really does humanize him. I mean, we see this a lot with a lot of the lore entries, right? Like with all the characters. You saw that with Aldrin, with his particular entries, Orin with Ecdysis and Dust and all that. I mean, it just seems like they're really, we've kind of mentioned this too. Destiny 1 was more about the world building, and this is more about the relationships within the world. And so I think we're seeing a lot more of that. And I really like that. This part of the world building process is what's the fun part.
Well, take Ada 1 as I think the primest of examples in that regard, where the way that Ada is portrayed early on for us, how she hates Guardians, how she's not very open and so on, and now a layer of that armor that she has had has started to really fall down, how her perspective has changed with time. She is the perfect epitome piece of showing how perspective can change a person. and how we can also garner a different perspective for like how we handled ourselves and what we did previously, because we were not kind to the Black Armory or anybody within it. And that is why Ada 1 is the way she is. And now it is, in a lot of rights, thanks to what Spider has done, our job to start to make amends for what we did, even if it is one Guardian going out and trying to make that difference. Because what we now know, even if it is black market or underneath the purview of what the Vanguard has been doing or what the Consensus has been doing, if Ada can once again bring back weapons in that respect for civilians, that's incredibly important to the cause of what we've been doing with the city as a whole. And for us, on our perspective piece, we can see it as we're getting loot out of it as well, but we've now just helped the city in a way that the city didn't even realize it needed it or understood where some of the pieces of technology even came from. That is why Ada is like I love that they led with Black Armory, because the rest of it, as we are going along, is offering this different perspective pieces as we've needed to kind of have them. And I'm going to be the first to say it. I can't wait to see how they're going to make me like Callus. Because as we all know, I hate him.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. We have one more card.
That's the best one.
But we missed it. It
Did we?
takes 3 hours.
I come in peace, brother.
3 hours to climb the mountaintop.
Yeah,
let me take this pill because this is important, actually. There is an exo with glowing eyes, and it released whatever weapon it was reaching for inside its greatcoat when Wu Ming approached with his hands held high. I come in peace, brother. Now who could that be?
And now Beard is excited where Green was excited.
Oh, it's like I want to sit here and cover it and take it from Blue entirely.
Go for it. Go for it.
All right. So we end up getting into the best Iron Lord period. There is nobody that goes above this man whatsoever. No, this is objective. This is not subjective. At least, no, this is not subjective opinion. This is objective fact. This man is the best Iron Lord out of all of them.
He's turning into what's his name? Oh my god, your impressions tonight are so on point.
Warlock bias.
I'm thinking Blast from the Past.
Black Flag in chat. Warlock bias. Warlock bias.
So, without further ado, the Dark Horse of Lord Fellwinter. This is who Wu Ming, or Drifter, is looking to come in contact with.
And apparently has been for a while.
For a long time. So much so that at least Lady Aphrodite was interested in coming down to the end of the world bar. But he basically said, forget it. Like, it's not official business. I don't care. And that actually carries into his character as we go along, which is fairly important. What I do find interesting, though, and I kind of have this written down, I'll kind of just start from the top, actually. Lord Fellwinter sat at one end of the table, Wu Ming at the other. Fellwinter is very matter-of-fact. He wants to know what Wu Ming wants to visit in visiting the peak. He has a very needed point in trying to meet with Fellwinter. What do you want? I heard you kill. A necessity of life in this post-collapse existence. No, I'm talking risen. Final deaths. It's gotten real taboo recently. You Iron Lords are changing things. And at this point, of course, we end up thinking about what was brought up previously with the Iron Edict. And
Iron Decree.
Iron Decree, Iron Edict. Yeah, I wrote it as Edict. I don't know what I was thinking. Either way, the Decree, however, at least is sort of explained in this entry, but you have to dig into it pretty far. Don't kill other Risen. Don't kill their ghosts. Turn warlords. Don't end them. and never involve the innocent. The last one, at least, is the most important as we kind of go along. Fellwinter effectively asks him, like, who are you? What are you doing here? What's the point of you even being here? And he says, well, I'm just your neighbor. I just live right down the mountain.
I just want some sugar.
Yeah.
God.
Got a cup of sugar to spare. Golf. Yeah. Okay.
Housekeeping?
Anyway. Housekeeping? But Wu Ming basically is like trying his best to like keep all of this off and so on. And he says, who are you? Fellwinter says, who are you? I don't believe you've been honest with me. And eventually Wu Ming gives up the ghost, literally. And he has his ghost materialize. And of course we figure out entirely that Wu Ming is Drifter, if you didn't figure it out earlier on. Fellwinter says, is this supposed to impress me? How else would you have survived the climb? Because don't forget, Fellwinter Peak is kind of cold, kind of chilly, and it's sort of big.
Well, the other thing, I mean, before you get there, it's just like you get another instance of Drifter not letting his ghost heal him.
Right. I gotta say, he wants to do it all on his own if need be, but apparently he isn't even good enough for that. But that's the major piece that you sort of start to sort of realize here with Drifter. Like, he's going to Fellwinter because he doesn't feel like, at least I feel like he doesn't have anybody else that would really understand this or get it. And that's why I think that Fellwinter is the reason that he would even like want to be around the Iron Lords at this point. Because as we know, he doesn't want to be around anybody. He very well would have been okay with just being on his own. But he wanted to involve this Lord of Iron for a very large reason. And it kind of all starts, here. Fellwinter says, as a warlord, I did many things I'm not proud of. Under the Iron Lords, I adhere to strict rules of engagement, Fellwinter said. His voice sounded hollow inside his armored skin. Ghosts are not valid targets. Drifter says, I heard you care very much about right and wrong, and the delivery of justice to those who deserve it. Fellwinter's eyes glowed brightly.
Brighter.
Brighter.
Yeah.
You have my interest.
You had my curiosity. Now you have my attention. Fellwinter says, I can't think of a more human act, he said after a moment's pause. I don't know that anyone has a right to that, but I believe in revenge with all my heart, and I have a request, knowing that you do what you do. Fellwinter tapped his chin. What are you asking? I'm going to sum this up because it is a rather long paragraph, but long story short, Drifter goes over the events of
Eton,
of what had happened in Eton, and he goes over Dryden's involvement and everything like that. The last couple sentences, though, in the intervening years, Wu had learned that Dryden kept this under wraps, and that he and his ghost were now among the most decorated of lords, next to the likes of rising champions like Lord Saladin and Lady Aphrodite themselves. Fellwinter sat frozen in his chair. It was difficult to tell if he had registered any of what Wu Ming had said. How do I know you're not lying? The hollow voice asked finally. I have live recordings, Wu replied. His ghost transmitted a data feed to Fellwinter's ghost, who nodded. So, actually it isn't much longer, I'll just read the rest of this. Eton, who were those people to you? Nothing. Just ghosts. You want revenge for people you care nothing about. Is the dark horse of iron for hire? Fellwinter stood and politely motioned for Wu Ming to take his leave. Wu sighed, shrugged, and left the chamber. He had a long climb ahead of him. The XO parted his coat and drew a long, bronze shotgun from his side. What do you think? His ghost asked. Call Lord Dryden. Prepare my iron banner arsenal.
Someone's in trouble!
Yeah, kind of final death sort of trouble. Now, what is also fairly, at least to me, interesting about all of this is that this is the lead up to when he and Seitan have their Seitan have their showdown, because Seitan is still alive, and apparently his ghost ends up getting his body back at one point, and so on. But that's the the other piece that I think is fairly interesting here. Like, this seems like a shifting point for Fellwinter to fall back to some of his older ways. And he also starts to deal with something that I think is fairly important for both Drifter and then Fellwinter as a whole. He starts really dealing with this idea of justice. He starts taking it among himself to go ahead and end a fair majority of like any of the Guardian, any of the Risen that really step out of line, be it Iron Lords or Warlords. And he starts to really like take judge, jury, and executioner upon himself. Meanwhile, if we look at that same instance for the Drifter, I think this is one of the reasons why the Nine approach him. Mm-hmm. I really feel like this is the connecting piece on like why the Nine overall are looking into why Drifter is such an important character within our system. Overall, he understands the ideas of justice and no mercy and so on, if need be, if it needs to apply to those that are within the vicinity or within those rights and laws and so on. And it's that piece that kind of like, it's
they want
exactly...
to understand him.
Right, and that's something that I think also falls in line with the Emissary. Because the Emissary Force with Orin, that is something else that also kind of like falls back onto like who she was as a person as well, as a Guardian especially. So these are a few pieces that I think overall sort of tie back to why the Nine want to interact with the three main ones that we kind of see. And those three main ones are Orin, Drifter, and ourselves. We're pretty well the three mains that kind of go into it, with the one outlier then also ending up being the Queen, who of course is kind of off doing her own general thing. But this also lies into one fifth and final, and that could possibly be Callus. What is his involvement with so many of these pieces? So there are three from our order, so to speak, that are easily interacted with the Nine. And then we have Callus and Mara as kind of like the offshoots of how all of that sort of sits with the Nine.
Well, and you also have Zur.
Yeah, I don't necessarily care or count him necessarily.
That's
because
true.
He's with the Nine, but yeah, you're right on that regard. I count Orin differently than Zur, just to kind of expand that a little bit more, only because like she was a Guardian previously. She has that like difference in how she was. Zur seems like he's been a puppet the entire time. That's just kind of like how things seem to be in that regard. All of a sudden, Zur's origin story pops up, and he was secretly like Clovis Bray Jr. or something. I don't know. The one thing though that going back actually to this rather long paragraph, Blue, you had mentioned about the combat and how things kind of went. I think it's in here.
Oh, about like why
Sagoth I think is already dead at this point, and how I think most of the combat kind of falls on. But the Warlord target had brought a fire team.
Oh yeah. Dryden. That's how Dryden made a name for himself. He later actually managed to hunt down the Red Man and kill him, which, you know, I think Dino in chat made a comment earlier too about to be fair, we don't know how. We know that Sagoth was killed, but we don't know how.
Well, I think that's actually where some of this came in, because they said, though Wu later learned that Dryden won the battle, he lost every lord under his command, ghosts and all, and he committed the additional sin of inflicting final deaths on the warlords he defeated in an act of bloodlust and rage. So for me, that's where I think it was ended, and where I think that Sagoth's final stand basically was in that regard.
Right. But that's what I mean is like that would also be tying into explaining Sagoth's role in the whole being the Red Man, because if Dryden enacted revenge on Sagoth, you know, however that works, then that, you know, it's just Dryden is a charlatan, and I get the feeling too that Drifter doesn't really even care that he's lying. It's again the connection to Eaton. It's like he's like, because there's plenty of things that he's like, I don't care about that, but it's because of you, because of, you know, the whole treatment of the people that he had chosen to try to be part of. I really see that as being the actual catalyst for his wanting revenge. And it seems like it's pretty overt. At least to me, it seems pretty overt.
No, I completely agree with that entirely. It was more just to like call it up and be like, this. By the end of the day, Dryden was the only one that left that field as far as Dryden knew. Like, there were no survivors at that point, and
right, and
he
so
could get away scot-free.
Right. I mean, kind of. He's not the only character that's done that either. I mean,
right.
To be bluntly fair, Shin does the same thing.
Yep. Well, and I think that's why Dryden has a mark in terms of like a weapon, but why, even though he ended up handling himself in the way that he did was he ever like renowned as an Iron Lord? Or
yeah, and I'm trying to remember.
Never given the chance.
I'm trying to remember
because he has
what his
it was a shotgun.
Was it a shotgun? Okay.
Yeah,
because I know it was Tormund. Tormund has the bellows, which has always been kind of like, I always picture that one as being the wrathful.
Right. Yeah, his was, which I find ironic because at that point it's basically dueling shotguns because you've got Fellwinter and you've got Dryden and they both kind of stand in the same general vicinity. Like, this is the other question though that kind of falls in line, and this is kind of like to the side of what we're talking about here with Drifter, more with Fellwinter. Did he ever tell the Iron Lords what he did?
Right,
did
and that's I think Chat was mentioning Fellwinter's lie.
Yep, I gotta say, like the lies kind of pile up with Fellwinter. We see it with like
Winter's Guile.
Winter's Guile. Yeah, I was gonna say Fellwinter's Guile, but I was half right. The way that those that entry goes, you could easily tailor that to be like, he's Clovis Bray, or he's like one of the Bray kids, or he's somebody that's like very much in line with how Willa was and whatnot. Or it was just like another that was in line with it all. Either way, like, he has knowledge of like how the Deepstone Crypt and stuff like that worked out and so on. That's why he was such an excellent exo to like look into. And I have a feeling it's not the last tale we're going to hear of him.
Oh yeah, I hope not.
I really have this feeling like if he ever wrote something down, we're going to recover a journal from him. We're going to recover something else from him. Just anything that would give more understanding of like why he was the way he was. And I think it would be accepted at this point because of like where we're at in the city's age and like how everything is kind of going. The Dark Ages as a whole, which also kind of falls back to like how the Drifter is in how he's presented and everything. The Dark Ages very much mimic our Dark Ages as we know from like the 500s to 1500s, etc. That's a very deep-seated spot where a lot of information was either kept under wraps, was looked at as like either hedonistic or heretical or anything.
Or just flat out lost.
Yeah, like you were just, if you did anything different, you were really out of line. Which makes me wonder like how much time something like, or somebody like Osiris was given like the time of day early on with his like crazy thoughts and whatnot and how he was sort of turning himself. But that's where I have this feeling that like if we were to walk into today's instance where we look at Ikora writing up in I think it's in the secrets, the Vanguard Secrets book,
the circle book.
Yeah, she's or not the circles, the friggin' stolen intelligence. There it is. Good grief. How she looks back on the Drifter and states how we need to not be so overt or so challenging to different beliefs or whatnot that are within the city. We have to be more open and to the understandings that are here. We need to not cast them out right away. And this is something that you would not hear from a speaker, like the speaker from a speaker-ran city. Within within about 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years, the general views of the city and its leadership have changed almost instantaneously. And in some cases, I guess it kind of like started to falter with the speaker a little bit. He was viewed more as like a figurehead, etc. But like that's where like the church's role as the Dark Ages ended. And within the city age now, we've moved into this Renaissance period, or this new golden age, where now we are discovering different elements and different matters of being, different places and ideals and thoughts, etc., that we wouldn't have welcomed previously through the possibly 1,000 years worth that the Dark Ages lasted.
Right. And I mean, I guess my counterpoint to that too is just from a historical standpoint as well. You know, it wasn't necessarily all the church or a religious order, you know, imposing sanctions on stuff like that too. I mean, a large part of the damage that was done.
The monarchy had a lot.
Yeah,
to do
it was like
that,
well, that and the sea people who were constantly screwing things up. But like, I mean, that's where you see actually in a lot of cases, you see especially in Ireland, which is where predominantly a lot of the culture was saved. It was because of the monasteries and because of the church that we even have records, and we even still can read on some degrees, is because they were bastions of education as well. So I mean, but yeah, I mean, I think also it speaks a lot more, you know, in that regard. For me, it speaks more to the philosophies of the vanguard versus the philosophy of the speaker. Right. And you see that with Ikora and Zavala's. Basically, they fully acknowledge they are not politicians. You know, when they made that claim, I was like, yeah, you know, that's where I mean, because Ikora as a researcher is obviously going to be more in line with like Tyra, and you know, the cryptarchy is, and that of course is scientific method. Like the more information you can gather, the better the picture you're going to get. You know, yada yada yada. Whereas with a politician like the speaker was, and you know, and not to say that I know it's a thin line, but it is a necessary thing when it comes to leading a large group of people. But at the same time, that's also you have to acknowledge the darker side as well. And the darker side is, sadly, that means that sometimes you get censorship. Is the gentlest word that I could probably use for what that is.
Yeah, that's the nicest way to put
that.
Yeah,
I mean, and the reason, and there's always at first a noble cause, you know, yeah, and everyone knows that's a slippery slope. Like, I mean, historically, we've all seen that across, even in reality, we see that a lot. But I that's how I read it, as more of a transition from, you don't have a politician in control. You have a person, or a group of people who are much more pragmatic about, you know, Zavala doesn't care about the niceties of politics. He cares about protecting people. I mean, you see that with the Cade situation. He's like, I don't care. We're not doing it. He doesn't care what feathers he ruffles. Whereas Ikora, with the stolen intelligence, I mean, to be fair, Ikora is the one that talks Zavala down about punishing Anor, about stealing the stuff once he finds out. You know, so like, and her entire point was that, you know, they are not babysitters. That's not their job. So I think that's also important too. And you see that a little bit, you know, and I go back to what we're talking about with like the Drifter and stuff like that. I think that's another thing that you kind of see is like, Green, I think you mentioned it during the Allegiance quest. He doesn't babysit us. You know, he's like, this is your choice. You have to live with the consequences of it. You know, whatever those consequences are. Because I know, like, if you choose the Vanguard side, he doesn't necessarily, like, I mean, he's not necessarily happy.
He'll call you a snitch.
Yeah, he's not happy at you, but he doesn't look down on you, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, he respects the fact that you made a choice. He doesn't necessarily agree with it, but he's like, you know, you made a choice. That's your prerogative. I can't remember exactly what he says, but it's something about like, you know, you chose to stand with what you saw was right. he doesn't trust you, but, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. But yeah, so extra long episode. We might have to split it into side B, side A. You guys want to do shout-outs real quick?
Beard, go first.
Okay.
Oh, right.
So, I don't have anything off the top of my head that I'm thinking of outside of just like the... I've been retweeting so many of them, I feel like, when I'm able to get on Twitter, which is... I could be on there a lot more. I choose not to be. There might be some mental reasons as to why I don't do that.
It's
just
a good
saying.
reason. It's a good...
Yeah.
It makes sense.
I really think so, considering I've seen more support in YouTube comments lately than I have seen on that site. Yeah, I think so. The biggest thing, though, that I love about Twitter, all the same, is that there are some outstanding people that are on that platform that don't go on a rhetoric or a narrative that they go ahead and talk about. Anyway, artists. I have loved so much of the art that I've been seeing either retweeted, posted, etc. lately, not even just from like the Destiny community, but just in general. It has been great to see people's talent. And it's not just like, here's a couple stick figures or something like that, which, by the way, is still art. These people are putting in the time and energy and effort they need to in order to like create something that they see in their mind's eye. That's amazing. It is something that I still cannot do properly to this day. So I have to give like major shout out at least to Brandon or the Gamma Trap. He continues to make some amazing pieces. He continues to work like day in, day out. And on top of that, on top of that, he continues to do it for both Mylan and himself. Because it used to be that he was just helping Mylan for the channel and so on. But he's been doing it for more reasons than just that anymore, and it's to actually grow as an artist.
And he is.
Which, not to say that he wasn't doing that previously, but he's doing such a fantastic job of that. And then I see stuff from, like, Brian Monkis. I see some other stuff from, as always, friend on the show, Jake Myler. He's always doing such great work with, like, his comic booky, cartoony, etc. style that he has that I think is just fantastic. But just artists in general. And then also to those that just don't stop trying as much as they can, or if they end up getting some type of rejection, or they end up like getting something pushed in their face to say, you can't do this anymore, there's no way you could ever do it, they try to turn that energy into something else. It's something that I have and still do struggle with, like, on a daily basis. It was the reason I ended up starting my YouTube channel, at the very least. But to see other people that are embracing how, when life gives you lemons, you find a new life or something.
No, you throw it back at them. You say, I don't want your lemons.
Yeah. And that's basically what all of these people are doing. Like, they're just like, well, these look good, I'm going to turn them into lemonade. And they either like look at the rotten ones and they're like, what are you giving me this for? Like, get out of here. Or they look at the ripe stuff and they're like, yeah, I can make something out of this. And it drives them to do something different. So I always want people to kind of remember that, like, turn your energies into something different if you can. It is something that is, again, still tough for me to do as somebody that was able to do it previously. It's hard to always remember what that feeling feels like because it's a fleeting one. It is such a fleeting one. Anyway, I feel like I turned this into something else. But those are my shout-outs. I'll leave it there.
I think it's important to hear and to say. I mean, just a friend of mine went through that this week, so it's one of those things you want to hear that, you want to see people continue, but you also want to remain supportive in whatever they choose. And some of the biggest companies and biggest creators out there had many, many rejections before they came up with their big idea. And their big idea wasn't necessarily the thing that they were trying to go for in the first place. My shout-outs, I have two. One that is more business for the show, one that is not. The one that is not is a huge shout-out to Nerd and Needle, Elaine does amazing patches. We were talking about art a second ago, and I finally got in my Gambit patches. I have all 4 Gambit patches, the green, yellow, white, and red. And they are gorgeous, along with my Queen's Guard patch that I got and a Crimson Days patch. But she does some really good work. And like for what she's selling, these are not expensive at all. They're really, really high quality. And it's nice to see some good patches come there.
That she made us some Focus Fire ones.
Yeah, we have Focus Fire ones too, but the Gambit patches are so cool.
She is now. She also just did the coins, if I remember right.
Yes, she was working on the coins last time I saw her tweet. I don't know if she's finished them yet, but I know she was
including
doing the design.
Fun one.
Mm-hmm.
The ding.
Is
ding,
it the
ding.
coin with? Yeah, with the
ding 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 on it. I love that.
I'm sorry, Christmas has ruined me. Anytime I sing "ding ding ding" written out, I think of some Christmas song. It's just Christmas is. Anyway, that's the normal shout out. The housekeeping shout out is the t-shirt that we just put up on the store. If you guys are looking for some swag, some Destiny swag or Focus Fire Chat swag, we have t-shirts that just got put up on Teespring for Focus Fire Chat that are our 2019 design. And it's different. We went in a totally different direction than we did before.
Yeah, we even hired a really high-priced artist to do it.
I'll wait for that check in the mail, Blue. I'll wait for that check. But yeah, those are available. It's really, Blue and I kind of went back and forth talking about pricing on it. We're not going to make a lot off of it. It's more we want. It's not what we're after with this. We're not trying to sell shirts to make money. It's the wanting to give you guys something to rep, wanting to give you guys something fun and kind of different that looks kind of cool. And it's for you guys, and it's fun for us to do too, and kind of put ourselves out there in a different way. So those shirts are available, and I'm sure Blue's going to have a link in the show notes for anybody who wants to go and look at them and possibly purchase some.
Mm-hmm. I will do that. And then, yeah, just to reiterate what Beard and Green have both been saying is like, just keep working at what you're working at. It sounds sometimes like it's simple, and I know it's not. These are tough times for a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons, and just know that, I saw a tweet going around there earlier, I think the last week, but just know that for me, and I know for Beard and for Green, I'm pretty sure I can say this too, is our DMs, our messages are open. If you need someone to chat with about something that's going on, we're more than happy. We're not professional, counselors by any stretch of the imagination, but we definitely can give you a shoulder to lean on or an ear to talk to. And I know that was like I said, there was a tweet that had been going around last week, I think it was, about open up. A lot of the content creators were opening up their DMs for anybody who needs it. And so just know that if that is something that you need, we're more than happy to help where we can with that. But yeah, that's more just to kind of reiterate what Green and Beard have both already said much more eloquently. But as always, we'll see you guys next week. Next week is going to be another pretty fun one. It is going to be over the lore book that Beard has already miraculously finished getting, and I'm one away from getting. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh my gosh, this is actually like Screeb. I've never appreciated Screeb so much. They give you so much credit for this, but it will be For Every Rose a Thorn. And I'm actually looking forward to discussing that with everyone. But you guys have a great week, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
With that, we'll begin to wrap the chat up. Thank you again to those over on Twitch for coming to spend your evening with us. If you'd like to join us for the live streaming of the episodes, please be sure to give us a follow over on twitch.tv/focusedfirechat. Links to all our episode archives can also be found at www.focusedfirechat.com. Please be sure to email us at focusedfirechat@gmail.com with any comments or questions for our team concerning the podcast, and let us know how we're doing by giving us some feedback and a rating over on iTunes iTunes as well. Also, be sure to check out all the amazing work being featured over on thelorenetwork.com. So until next time, focus your fire, and may your light shine bright.